Thank you, Wendy. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, members of the public gallery. Welcome to our council briefing for the 8th of September 2020. I'd like to start by acknowledging we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We haven't received any apologies this evening, but I'm just noting that we do have Councillor Wallace attending by Zoom and Councillor Loden is late at this stage, but we'll sing out if he joins us. He's likely to be attending via Zoom. He's in the waiting room. Okay. Hello, Dan. Hello, Councillor Loden. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank
We're
you.
all accounted for. All right, so we'll go to public question time and receiving of public statements. So members of the public gallery, welcome. You're able to come to the microphone, speak for up to 3 minutes. Please just state your name, the suburb in which you reside and the item which you are speaking to. There's no set order, but I can see we have someone ready to go. So please go ahead. Oh, and just to let you know, we are live streaming. If anyone has an objection to their comments being live streamed, please do let me know. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, councillors. My name is Mario Sequeira. I'm from Hospitality Total Services. We are a hospitality management design company offering client services for the last 28 years in Perth, over East and internationally. I reside in Cardinia and my office is in Applecross. I'm here today to talk to you about 465 William Street in Perth. As you may or may not know, the premise operated as a restaurant, Meat Candy, and actually closed its doors some 18 months ago. That site, in a prominent site on the corner of Brisbane and William Street, is now lying vacant and derelict. My client, Dr. Drew Daniels, who's present here, who's had interest in other hospitality venues successfully in this council and in other councils, has now been approached to reactivate that place. And what he wants to do is create a meeting place for local residents to come and socialize with friends and family. The restaurant license permits an operator to go for 24 hours. As long as the kitchen's open, they can apply for liquor without a meal. The reason that we're looking at the small bar license is purely to allow flexibility with the operation. The government brought in that license category for smaller venues, and in fact, this venue is even restricted to 70 persons. The flexibility that it allows is that patrons then have the option if they wish to stand or sit while they're at the premise. The application was advertised. There was overwhelming positive responses to the advertisement, that advertising that was we were given to understand. There were a few concerns. The only concern that the council officer raised with us was that about noise. So we met with the council health officer and planning officer on site last week, discussed a few things, and we decided then that an acoustic assessment would be done to ameliorate those concerns. That has been commissioned now, and we await the recommendations. And on that basis, I encourage you to support the council officer's decision or his recommendation to approve the application. It has already been approved by the Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor and conditionally approved to operate under a small bar license. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mario. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Mayor Cole and elected members. My name is Gary Fitzgerald. I live in Mount Hawthorn. I'm asking a series of questions relating to the property management framework, item 7.2 of the agenda papers. I have 6 questions. I'll be as quick as I can. The biggest concern to the North Perth Tennis Club is the additional cost being imposed on the club over and above the 276% increase in fee due to the GRV charging methodology. We don't have a real problem with the GRV methodology. It's a tool, but this is the cost due to the property management framework. And as always, the devil is in the detail. First question, is council aware that the club will now be required to set aside funds annually for a potential future bore replacement? To give you some perspective and evenness on the discussion, the replacement of the bore in the current lease is a little bit of a grey area. You also need to note that the bore was recently replaced. The cost of the bore replacement was met by the City of Vincent. Thank you for that. It was a joint effort to deliver that. And I thank the administration staff in jointly delivering that for both the North Perth Tennis Club and the community gardens. You also need to note the response on page 218 that council may replace the bore at its sole discretion. Unfortunately, that does not provide the North Perth Tennis Club with any financial certainty going forward. So we'd like some clarity on that. The second question is council aware the club will now be required to set aside funds for the maintenance of the bore? Again, some perspective. You need to note the club has not previously paid for bore maintenance costs in the last 20 years that I've been a member. Before that, I'm not quite sure. You also need to note that there is a... You need to note the club has not previously paid for bore maintenance costs in the last 20 years that I've been a member.
Sorry, just check if someone's got their volume switched on, because that can then get playback happening.
You need to note the club has not previously paid for bore maintenance costs in the last 20 years that I've been a member.
Sorry, just check if someone's got their volume switched on, putting when you hear yourself on repeat. So I'll join in and we can both feel uncomfortable. Okay, testing. Please continue.
Okay, so just to reiterate, the club has not previously paid for bore maintenance. And noting the administration did respond to this in page 217, 218, you might like to read it, but the club does not agree with the administration's interpretation. Third question, is council aware that the club will now be required to allow for building insurance excess of up to $1,000 per claim on the insurance policy, which is paid for by City of Vincent but is reimbursed by the North Perth Tennis Club for that premium? You should note, please, that the current lease with the club, we only pay the excess if the claim is due to an act or omission by the North Perth Tennis Club. And we're happy with that arrangement. It seems fair and reasonable. I would also like to note that the administration tried to impose an excess on the club recently when a storm event blew over a wall. This is clearly not an act or an omission from the club. It's just one of those events. This was only resolved when a compromise was reached to replace the wall with a fence. But it's an issue for us in terms of cost and liability. The fourth question, is council aware that the club will now be required to allow for the cost of malicious damage and break-ins, which is now included in the maintenance obligations chart at page 260. We welcome that chart being included. It starts to provide some clarity about the detail of the new lease to be agreed. And it's a good step forward. Unfortunately, the club has very little control over antisocial behaviour and damage to the building and the premises. The premises is open, apart from the netted grass court area. The surrounds are open to the community. It is a pathway for community members between Farmer Street and Namer Streets, and we are accepted of and welcome community activity in and around the clubhouse, particularly the old croquet court, which would be occupied every night of the week or every day of the week and night. We believe the club should not be responsible for the cost of damage in such an environment. Fifth question, along a similar vein and included in the maintenance obligations chart, is a requirement for the club to allow for the cost of vandalism and graffiti. Once again, the club has very little control over antisocial behaviour, and the same comments apply to community access. And we don't think it is reasonable cost for such damage in an environment to be imposed on the club. In summary, the last question, is Council aware that while the additional cost to the North Perth Tennis Club is $1,914, and this is due to the revised charging policy. Refer to page 276 of the agenda papers. However, the additional cost imposed or likely to be imposed on the club at this stage due to the property management framework, which is not clear in any of the agenda papers that you've got, is in the order of $3,300 to the club. The club is a small club. This would provide great financial stress to the club, and we ask your consideration of all those issues going forward. Thank you, Mayor Cole and members.
Thank you, Gary. We'll ask some of these questions when we come to this item. Thank you. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you. Hi. Okay, good evening, Mayor, Councillors and Council Officers. My name is Lou DeFloria and I'm the Manager of Adbrands Media, the applicant for the proposed rooftop garden terrace with digital screen for number 12, Newcastle Street, Perth, item 5.3. The information that we would like to bring to your attention has been provided to us by our lawyers at Thompson Gear. Point 1, there is legal discretion for the Council to approve the application under its scheme and local policy. 2, as set out by our lawyers in the grounds for review attached to the SAT application, the City's local policy 7.5.2, signs and advertising, sets out the types of development that do not require planning approval. Point 3, importantly, we acknowledge that we do not meet that criteria, and as a result, we have lodged an application for planning approval for you to consider. 4, importantly, the policy expressly contemplates that advertising signs may not comply with the deemed to comply standards of the policy, in which case planning approval is required. Point 5, in those circumstances, as is the case here, the application is required to be considered against the variation principles as set out in clause 5I and 5.2 of the policy. 6, I ask that you please have the policy and in particular 5I and II in front of you when you're considering this application. And we have copies of the City's policy that sets out the above clauses to give to you after this deputation if required. Point 7, we made a genuine attempt to better address the concerns initially raised by officers at and following mediation, including a reduction in advertising screen display size and the provision of greater community benefit through agreement to plant and maintain 10 street trees in the locality, given street trees are sparse in this part of the city, and significantly, the provision of 1 in 10 advertisements being provided free of cost to the city for it to promote the city and local community events. Point 8, in considering the application against clause 5I and II of the policy, the proposed development is appropriate to its setting and does not compromise the local amenity as A, the scale of the proposed development is consistent with the heights expected on the Newcastle activity corridor area under the city's local planning policy 7.1.1, which provides for a 6-storey building height limit at the property. B, the proposed development has been designed by a reputable local architect, which is Malcolm Mackay, to complement the style of the existing building on the property, and we have been through a number of rounds with the design review panel to improve the design as best as possible. C, the proposed development is compatible with the scale of existing surrounding development and will not dominate the streetscape given. I, the height and scale is consistent with that contemplated on LPP 7.11. The height of the proposed development is less than half that of the neighbouring building opposite side of Newcastle Street, which is 10 stories in height. The digital screen is smaller than the size of signage on the neighbouring building opposite side of Newcastle Street, which contains 2 large signs, 6.4 metres tall by 5 metres wide, facing north, and the other one, which is 5 metres tall by 36 metres wide, facing east. There is limited visibility to the proposed development and digital screen by people travelling along Newcastle Street or Lord Street. The proposed development does not block any important views. The proposed development does not obscure any existing architectural detailing, and there is no destruction of important elements of the existing building fabric. Addressing Main Roads WA comment, our traffic expert has said that Main Roads WA are simply wrong.
Lou, just to let you know, you have reached 3 minutes, so if you wouldn't
I'll
mind.
let my son to finish this.
Yep,
off,
that'll
if
be
you like.
fine. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
Good evening, councillors and Mayor. My name is Paul DeFlorio. I am the Director of Adbrands, and this is obviously following on from my father, Lou. Thank you for those who took my phone calls the other day, yesterday. I appreciate your time. For those that didn't, that's okay. We're all busy, so thank you very much. You guys have put in for reconsideration today. Now, reconsideration means with the intent to change your mind. Now, hopefully that is what we're here today to do. Following on from Lou, with the Main Roads comment, our traffic expert has said that Main Roads WA are simply wrong in the comments contained in their last correspondence to council. There was a single crash, which makes our application non-compliant with Main Roads policy. This single crash arose from a person having a head-on collision driving the wrong way, eastbound down the Graham Farmer westbound off-ramp to East Parade. The crash occurred over 900 metres away from the site that we are talking about today, being 12 Newcastle Street, in the location that can't even be seen, and this therefore should be disregarded from the assessment. If that single crash is removed from the data as an anomaly, unrelated to the safety of this location, the site then complies with Main Roads policy for crash history. Further to what Lou was saying in regards to that our site will not block any views of the city, we've had a drone that was taken to the site of where the Hanson batching plant is. That drone took different images, which we have forwarded to you via email, which hopefully some of you were able to have a look at. Now, we've taken photos from, I think it was the ground, level 2, level 3, and so on. As you can see, the monstrosity being next DC building blocks all significant structures of the city. Next DC are also proposing and have approval for a building behind their existing building, which will then block out the Central Park building in the background there. So our little digital screen, which we have also lowered in size, have made significantly smaller, which Main Roads have approved, and Zelco from Main Roads has also said they are willing, at the cost of Adbrands Media, to make changes to the freeway merge points and inside the tunnel to make it further safe for oncoming traffic to view the digital screen. Now, as we know, at Bull Creek Station, the digital screen that has been put up there, Main Roads approved that site and are receiving an income from that site. Now, may not be Main Roads directly, but it is a government agency receiving this money. Main Roads have modified that lane to suit. So we know that Main Roads are happy to do whatever is necessary, and Zelco from Main Roads has said that to us, to help us do whatever we need to do within reason to make this billboard happen. So if you can please, like I said, reconsider, make changes, and hopefully approve this item 5.3, that would be much appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul. Are there any further speakers this evening?
Good evening, Mayor Cole and councillors. My name's Vern Gardam. I live at 20 Hutt Street, Mount Lawley, and I'd like to speak to item 7.2. I'm aware that this is a new area for the council to be working in, and I am going to treat the current paper as being a work in progress. It needs work on it. It needs proofreading. It needs synchronisation so various parts within the paper reflect what other parts do. I'm sorry to say that I've come to the conclusion that the paper in its current form is not going to work. It's not going to work because the community benefit matrix hasn't been attached to it. And that's an important component in the consideration of how the system works. I'd now like to go to a part of on page 210, and that is under the assisting clubs and groups to transition across to the property management framework. It notes that there are 8 sporting clubs and community groups in category 1 and 2 who are currently on month-to-month leases or holding over. The issue that I want to raise in relation to this, that these could go back to 2018. One of the issues with a holding over lease, that it results in a 10% increase in the lease rate. Now, I don't know of any club who would voluntarily say that they applied for framework to come in. In fact, it's simply an extra charge that's imposed on the club by the lease, and it's a significant amount if you take it over 2.5 or 2 3/4 years. Now, my question is, will the council consider reimbursing that money because it provides absolutely no benefit to the lessee? It's simply an impost because of the terms of the lease and the fact that leases have been put on hold. Clubs haven't been able to apply to get a lease. It's simply, it'll all be dealt with under framework. And with that question, it goes to recommendation 6, that says that there will be a 4-year transition period. Ask whether the council will consider removing the 10% penalty on leases until the things are resolved over the next 4 years. Now, I notice that on page 210, there are amendments to property management framework, and I'd have to say that the paragraph and the dot points seem to miss out on tenses. In one case, it refers to changed, where in fact that hasn't occurred on the relevant documents. And the other one, it simply says the property management framework will be updated to reflect this change. I refer to the last dot point, and that's the removal for category 1 and 2 clubs and groups to repaint the facility inside and out every 5 years. I'm wondering whether this has been brought to the Director of Infrastructure's attention. And I now go to an old friend. It's now turned up in the guise of attachment 9. And this is the financial and percentage change in disposition that Mayor Cole requested be provided back in March. And my complaints about this form are the same as they were earlier. This form shows deplorable arithmetic. It basically says, in relation to the Leederville Tennis Club, the current lease amount is $1. It is going to go up to the proposed annual rent is $3,742.50, and it shows the percentage change as being a 99.75% increase. Essentially, this is arrived at by not applying a formula to the correct figures. Now, this paper has been available since the 10th of March. It has been subject to critical comment from me about the deplorable arithmetic and the misleading nature of the percentage increases. And it, frankly, it points to the fact that the paper hasn't been proofread properly. It hasn't even been relabelled. It's simply been attached as attachment 5 draft property management framework, which goes back probably 3 papers. So I'm sorry, but in terms of this, as I said, more work needs to be done on this paper. However,
Fern, just to let you know, you have passed your 3 minutes. So if you wouldn't mind just making your concluding comments, that would be
Right.
appreciated.
fine. This paper on page, and you'll have to forgive me while I find it, it's attachment 9, and it is page 275. This really illustrates the unfairness of the GRB being rated on, charged by GRB because of the difference that Mount Hawthorn, North Perth Playgroup and the Highgate Forest Park Playgroup pay. It ranges in the just the proposed 10%. The range is from $722 up to $3,085 for essentially the same premises. The GRB charges by location, not by the facility that's being leased. Thank you for the extended time and thank you for listening.
I really just wanted to support some of Vern's comments. I asked a question online today and I'm not quite sure it's got to everybody. So I want to,
What was the question?
Mayor Cole, the question related to, and I put it online not to bog down tonight's meeting, but I wanted to make sure it was there.
This is the one that-
I support the view that there is quite a number of errors.
I just to clarify, Malika was going to read it out for you, but you're very welcome to read it yourself.
Okay, so it reinforces a comment that Vern made, relates to item 7.2. Is Councillor aware that on page 276, the percentage increase decrease figures in the table are wrong? The financial implication between current and proposed charging methodology is wrong. The incorrect numbers are used to make the calculation. So for North Perth Tennis Club, the percentage increase in fee, we believe should be read to 97%, not 66.3% as stated in the table. All of those calculations are wrong. And the Leederville one is a glaring one. So $1 divided by right is a very, very large
It's very
number.
obviously wrong, yes.
So the amounts are right, but the calculations are right.
Okay.
And the only other comment is there are quite a number of numerous errors in the document. The matrix is not included. I'm not quite sure the process about getting that, if it's voted tonight, whether that...
Oh no, we're not. This is the beauty of having council briefings, so you can sort out all of this
I'm sure
stuff.
that'll be done. And I think it would be useful if the errors are corrected. There's numerous.
Yes, I
number of
absolutely agree. We do not want errors in our report, and this will absolutely have to be corrected before it's adopted by council.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Were there any other speakers from the public gallery? Okay, we did have, was it 2 questions? So Gary's asked his own question in person tonight. So we had one other question on notice that a manager of governance will now read out.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So we've got one question from Kylie Everett of North Perth. That's in respect to item 8.7. The question or statement is, my husband and I have entered into a contract to purchase the property at 200 Vincent Street in North Perth and wish to purchase the adjoining block at 202 Vincent Street, North Perth, which the council is selling. Attached is our offer. So they've submitted an offer or part of an offer and acceptance form, and the offer is for $480,000. We request that this matter be considered under item 8.7 of the agenda for the briefing tonight on the 8th of September 2020. Under our proposal, please note that council will not have the ongoing responsibility for the maintenance of the property as it will under the main roads offer. And that's the question. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. The CEO has just pointed out to me that we have had a replacement page issued for that attachment 9 to 7.2, which is the adoption of the property management framework. So I haven't had a chance to check the figures, but I think there's been an attempt to correct some of that in the replacement page. So we'll check back on that. Thank you. Okay. So that concludes public question time for this evening, and I thank you all for your contributions. I'll just move on now to the CEO to see if we have any declarations of interest.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, received 2 declarations of interest, both from Councillor Toppelberg. The first relating to item 5.1.
Can I just check if someone's got their microphone turned on? It's just a bit of feedback.
I think this one might be a bit
Just
scratchy.
a dodgy, okay, scratchy.
Yeah, I've got the scratchy microphone. Regarding the change of use application, Councillor Toppelberg declares that the applicant is a personal acquaintance. The second is a disclosure of interest affecting financial and proximity. It's a financial disclosure in relation to item 6.1 on the commercial waste strategy, noting that Councillor Toppelberg operates a business which would be directly impacted by the proposed changes. Councillor Toppelberg's not seeking approval to participate in the debate or remain in the chambers or vote on the matter. Mayor Cole, I did mention this to Councillor Toppelberg that I would read this as an interest in common because it would impact every commercial ratepayer or potentially every residential ratepayer, depending on what the decision was on rebates or refunding. And I thought it'd be useful, particularly if we're in a situation where we had a council with a majority number of councillors who were small business owners or commercial ratepayers, that would make decision making on something like this quite difficult, considering we only have one commercial ratepayer. That's slightly unusual for a council. So I thought it'd be useful just to clarify that and discuss that before it was noted.
Well, it's always up to the disclosure. So I'll go back to Councillor Toppelberg, but you've received that advice from the CEO.
Thank you. Not that declarations of interest are open for debate or discussion, but just to point out the interest in relation to the financial impost also relates to the impost on non-commercial ratepayers because of the benefit or otherwise. So given there's only 1,600 commercial ratepayers out of a total of 17,000 ratepayers, I don't deem it to be an interest in common with a sufficient enough proportion of ratepayers that my financial interest would be otherwise. If it was the other way, which is everyone else's circumstance, maybe so, but 1,600 out of 17,000 odd ratepayers, I don't believe that to be the case.
I thought the figure was 2,400 odd commercial premises that this would be impacting.
Through you, Mayor Cole.
Not that I'm not debating you. This is absolutely, as I said, it's up to the disclosure. I'm not debating with you, Councillor Toppelberg, and I respect your decision.
And through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify, the Act doesn't define what a significant number is, and it's up to each and every application to confirm whether or not there were a number of electors or ratepayers which would have a common interest, which is significant, which is what you'd consider in everyday language. So sufficiently large or important. I thought it was useful, important to note that for council for future disclosures as well.
2,488 commercial premises paying business rates. Anyway, not up for discussion. Okay, does that conclude the declarations of interest? Thank you. So just to explain to members in the public gallery, this is the council briefing and the decision-making meeting is next week. So what happens from here is that council members ask questions of administration in advance of next week's meeting. So what we normally do is go to those items that have been raised by members of the public gallery, given that you're here and you may not wish to be here all night. So the first item that was raised was 5.1, number 465 William Street, Perth, proposed change of use from eating house to restaurant and small bar. Council members, are there any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett.
Through the Mayor to the Acting Director. Yeah. Just a question about consistency. Last month we had a small bar application that we have a different end time of 10 p.m. on Sundays on Oxford Street, and just wondering about the difference here in terms of location.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So in relation to last month's item, the applicant had requested the hours 7 to 10 on weekends, or actually they were varying the policy, but they wanted to open at 6 a.m, but they had accepted the 10 p.m. closure on Sundays. The applicant for this proposal would like to maintain the midnight closure because that's consistent with how they've been operating previously, and the licensed premises policy doesn't have any requirements for restaurants in there. So from their point of view, they don't see that it's a big departure from the operations that have occurred to date on site.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Toppelberg and then Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a couple of questions in relation to noise and the location. So my understanding is that the property is zoned commercial. The adjacent properties to the west are zoned mixed use, residential commercial, but there's a right of way that exists. So there's two properties adjacent, then there's a right of way. One of the two properties adjacent is currently being used commercially, I think, but the immediately adjacent property has a residential zoning. Can we just get some clarity around the noise regs that are required to be that are required to be met, given that the property zoning is commercial and there's mixed use adjacent? Is it the same as if it was adjacent to just a residentially zoned property?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So I believe that the way the acoustic report would be set out is that they identify the zoning of the land, and that's the baseline for how the noise regs are applied, and then they would look and see how those premises are being operated, but it ultimately comes back to what the zoning is and how that would inform the noise requirements that they have. So I think it's that the lower prescription would apply given its mixed use, but then in their actual assessment that they would comment on the fact that the site's been used for commercial purposes and that might allow for some greater tolerance on that immediately adjoining property.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I just want to get clarification on a couple of things. Parking cash and lieu, previous approval required that contribution of just over 14,000 to be paid. Just want to confirm that has been paid.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we believe that it has, but I can confirm in the briefing notes the date of that completion of the payment plan.
Thank you. And also the previous application required that an acoustic report was required to be submitted. And I noticed in the report that hadn't been satisfied, that condition, but was it because the report wasn't submitted or one was provided but not satisfactory? Just want to get an indication of whether records show any attempt to satisfy that condition.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, a report was submitted. Unfortunately, it wasn't satisfactory and it doesn't meet the current noise requirements for this type of premises. So that's the recommendation of the city's health officers, is that we obtain an acoustic report for this land use, which may have different acoustic requirements. And as the applicant mentioned, that's been discussed and they've engaged a consultant for that.
Thank you. And I just want to note, maybe it's been updated on Docs on Tap, but my copy had a blank form on page 18 and page 19's plan was quite unclear. So I'm not too sure whether other councillors had that same problem, but particularly page 19 is just not visible from my point of view. So I'm just wondering if we can get a better copy.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we'll include that in the briefing notes. It looks like the agenda online hasn't been updated.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? Okay, thank you. The next item raised was 7.2, adoption of property management framework. Questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Can we just get some commentary in relation to some of the issues raised from the gallery in terms of the, I guess, observed in some of the observed inaccuracies or in the report? And then I guess my other question just really relates to the costs to the city of implementing the transition approach, and how, and the whether there is a changed financial outcome of adopting this policy with the changes that have come back following advertising. I believe previously I was provided with some advice on the cost of continuing with the status quo versus moving to the property management framework in terms of the obligations that would land with the city. And as some of those obligations have now changed, so for example, painting, etc., what the changed financial position is in relation to the overall, like say, 5-year total cost of implementing this policy.
Sorry. Through you, Mayor Cole. On the first point, I will have a look through that document and get you back those figures. We did adjust a couple of figures after we got comments from North Perth Tennis Club earlier today. I will look through the rest of the document and make sure that the information is correct. In regards to the other point, I will bring up with the Director of Infrastructure and we'll have a look and provide comment on the other item as well.
Councillors. Councillor Fotakis.
Just want to there note that a number of clubs have been in a holding position for some time. Just want to get an indication of should the framework be endorsed by council, what sort of indication for these clubs or community groups that have been waiting at least as to when we could actually expect? So what's the sort of anticipated time frame moving on from here?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we will be working with the clubs that are carrying in the holding over pattern, probably in the next 6 to 12 months to get them all transferred across to the new property management framework, if that's endorsed. And then we'll work through the other clubs in order of whether they are keen to go across as soon as possible. Otherwise, as their leases expire, we will be aiming to move them across to the new property management framework.
And I'm sorry I didn't actually jot down the page, but it's pretty easy to find within the report. There was some commentary in one of the submission from the Leederville Cricket Club, and did refer to the Florida Athena Football Club being responsible for all outgoings from April to September annually. So I just want to get a clarification on that, considering that we've got a new lease with Florida Athena, and I didn't see that it actually, it didn't specify your rates and taxes, what would apply to that, but just some clarity on it being referenced to Leederville Cricket Club and the implications through for Florida Athena.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice and I'll get you an answer, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So this is a question, and I'm not expecting the answer, but the decision to use GRV as the measure is based on the property itself rather than the use, because obviously it's, and so some of the questions that have been asked of me in the lead up to this by interested community members relate to, because it's not greenfields, we're not starting with the properties unoccupied. So we're not saying these are our properties, these are the GRVs, these are the percentages. Are there any play groups? These would be the ideal properties for you. We're actually dealing with existing users, and most of those are users based either on historical or location specific. So take play groups as an example. Are we able to get some further commentary? And again, I don't expect the answer now, but some commentary as to what other methodologies were considered and why GRV, which relates to the building, not necessarily the use, given that most of them are existing uses in a small number of buildings, why we settled on GRV. I know there has to be a measure, but why GRV is deemed to be the best measure for the appropriateness of what people should be paying. And again, I understand we won't have the answer now, but that's when you end up with numbers like you've got in the playgroups of similar use that are location bound in buildings that are available to them that are there for the city. The question that gets asked of us is, well, why is one paying 5.5 times what the neighbours down the road are paying?
Yep, through you, Mayor Cole. We certainly will provide that information to you. I know officers have had discussions with other neighbouring councils about how they have applied it. There is no common sort of thread amongst those councillors, from what I understand in the few days I've been in this role. But I will find some information and get that back to council.
The further question is, where there are those clear disparities for some of those uses that are existing, the framework doesn't provide for a subjective framework by which you would provide potentially any further relief. So if council was of a view, for example, that there should be equitable payments for playgroups, for example, in any of the properties that we occupy, maybe by square meterage or otherwise, regardless of their GRV or location, is it possible that that can be built into the framework rather than being an arbitrary decision where you end up with some of the situations we've had in the last 20 years where people end up on mates rates for reasons that were not transparent? Is that something that can be built into the framework, that there is I suppose a framework for a subjective view that departs from the GRV, assuming that the GRV is maintained as the measuring tool? Theo looks desperate to say something on that too. So
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to
Just suggesting the code of conduct could be an appropriate place to start.
Mayor Cole, through you, Mayor Cole, to clarify or to comment on the GRV issue, rather than the current user group, and we're talking about community groups in this instance, the GRV does give council and the city some way to measure the opportunity cost for other alternative uses for a particular building or site. And then therefore there's some sort of comparison about what revenue could be foregone for a current user group or a lease if it was put to an alternative use, which then could influence council's decision making about the appropriate use, particularly around a community group in one building over another.
Anything further?
Sorry, just to finish that off, I would appreciate if it's possible, and I understand time is a bit short, but if there could be some form of amendment that provides a subjective framework for those uses that are deemed to be essential community uses, not specific to the current occupancy or potential occupant, but the principle of the use, that there's something within the framework that gives council or future decision makers guidance on ways in which, so it may just be a variation of the maximum, what have we did?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the 50% community subsidy.
Correct, but on what basis that may end up at 70 or 80 or another percentage, that it would be helpful to have some guidance within the policy itself rather than an arbitrary decision made either in the chamber or in another way.
Councillors? Oh, sorry. Thank you, Lou. Councillor Loden, I'm sorry. Is there any way to make Councillor Loden and Councillor Wallace bigger on the screen? Because they're absolutely tiny. I don't really need to see the screens of us. I really need to see them. Is that possible? Okay. If you start speaking, Councillor Loden, you may become large-sized. So please go ahead.
I feel like I should sit further away from the
There
screen
you
in
go.
that case.
Yeah, now I can see you.
Oh, I can see me too. That's kind of disconcerting. Through the chair, my question was just, I received an email from a member of the Leederville Cricket Club raising some concerns about the consultation that occurred with this process, and also a clarification around the responsibility for water and electricity, with some of it being used in the public domain. I know that's already been answered in the report, but I was hoping the director could provide some feedback in regards to what consultation has occurred and engagement around those issues as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole. From my understanding, consultation was carried out in last November with the clubs, with all the clubs in person. Further consultation earlier this year. I did provide a response to Councillor Loden late this afternoon, detailing those consultations, but I will clarify that further if needed. Staff did meet on site with pretty much every club as far as I'm understanding, and went through any issues that they had, and there's quite a lengthy document and amendments or attachments with the consultation attached to the actual framework report there as well.
Councillor Loden, anything further? Okay. Councillor Wallace, I'm just checking in with you just to make sure. No, you're good. Okay. Councillors, any other questions? Okay, look, I will go to some of the questions that were raised, first of all, by Gary around North Perth Tennis Club. I'm interested to know currently in relation to things like building insurance excess, where it's not by act or omission of the club or the community group, malicious damage and break-ins and vandalism. Is that under our current leasing arrangements? Where do these responsibilities sit?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So it will depend on the lease. So sorry, did you have a
Well, this is in relation to, this was a specific example. It's the requirements are for all category 2, but this is particularly in relation to North Perth Tennis Club.
Okay, I'd have to check the terms of the North Perth Tennis Club's current lease, but with most of our current leases, the responsibility is with the tenant to be for those, which is one of the reasons with the proposed property management framework that we were looking at creating a maintenance schedule and changing the obligations, but apologies, we'll have to review the terms of that exact lease.
Okay, and just in relation, again, specifically to North Perth Tennis Club, but this might be an issue for other tennis clubs too, bore maintenance, also potentially North Perth Bowling Club, anywhere where lawn is used. Just in relation to the responsibility for maintenance of the bore, is that a new cost?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Again, it depends on the terms of the lease. With the North Perth Tennis Club, I believe there was a negotiation that we'd cover the cost. So we have in the past previously upgraded some bores at the city's cost, but I don't believe that's strictly, it depends on the terms of the lease again. And previous leases weren't very clear on these obligations. So that's why with the property management framework, I believe it's trying to clarify exactly who's responsible.
Yes, I'm just looking though at the schedule of maintenance obligations for category 2 and just I just wanted to actually put my eyes on, I don't know if it actually talks about bores in this schedule. Does it talk about it in here? It doesn't. It's silent. So I think we probably just need to understand where bores sit, if that's, because that would affect a number of our clubs with turf. Okay. Also, so if we can get some extra information about that, I just also wanted to ask in relation to some of the questions that Byrne raised. He's raised the issue of a 10% additional leasing cost for leases in holding over. Is that the case? Or is that something that's specific to Forest Park Croquet Club?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is actually a term of current leases, most of the lease precedents. So again, the current leases range from leases that are like almost 20 years old. Some have more recently been drafted and the terms included weren't consistent. That is in some of the leases. I'm not sure of Forest Park, I'd have to check that, but we haven't ever imposed that. So at the moment, if a club's on holding over, we continue to charge the current rent as at the expiry. So all the clubs that are currently occupying pursuant to the holding over provision of the lease are paying the current rent.
Okay, so the 10% has not been charged?
Not been charged on any.
Universally across the board? Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, also just in relation to Byrne's comment about the community benefit matrix not being attached, can we just get some clarity around that? Because if it's referred to, it should be part of the document.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll get onto that one.
Okay, all right, so that the intention is to attach that. Okay. All right, now I think that covers, yes, arithmetic has also been covered off. Okay, so my questions. I just wanted to ask, when it's got the actual tables about leasing, tenancy fees, so on page 251, under, actually 250 for category 1 and 2. So category 1 says the tenancy fee is 10% GRV, and under category 2 it just has ticks in the box. So I'm wondering why, but the other, and then the category 3 and 4 talks about negotiated and negotiated by reference to market valuation. So I'm just wondering if the ticks needed to be a bit more clear.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice and get you the information on that clarity.
So do you know what you can see what I'm meaning? Okay, all right. I had a similar question to Councillor Gontaszewski in that some of the figures have moved, the costs have moved since this was advertised, like outgoings, insurance, painting, rubbish costs. Could we receive advice on costings and implications for the long-term financial plan to the city? I was also going to ask about rubbish, because some of the existing community groups are paying rubbish removal costs. And this goes to, if we don't have a commercial service, who will be providing the rubbish removal, given the city will be paying for it? Will we be paying for a contractor to remove rubbish from our tenants? Happy for these to be taken on notice.
I could probably answer that now, Michael, if you want. I think that depends on the nature of the service they require. If we can accommodate it, we would. If we couldn't, then we would get a contractor to do it. So it depends on the specific nature of that service.
Okay, so if that could potentially be factored into the costings. I'm just noting there has been a lot of commentary on the GRV methodology, and I think that could be discussed at the council meeting, but I'm just wondering that where we've actually got the revised table, which was provided as a replacement page, it's clear that there are a number of groups that are impacted much more. So if you look at those that are over a 100% increase, you're looking at North Perth Tennis Club, says here 198 now, although Gary thought that it was 297% increase, so still probably need to look at that. Forest Park Croquet Club 404, Lowton Park Tennis Club 180. I just wanted to also clarify that because there's been some shifting of costs back to the city in terms of outgoings and rubbish and things like that, if you actually look at the overall costs to the tenant, not just the leasing fee, but those responsibilities that are shifting back to the city, could we have that factored into, so that we're looking at not only the leasing costs, but the overall costs, and what, whether there's any cost savings to the community groups on the basis of no longer paying for rubbish, outgoings, insurance, premiums, etc., so that we're looking at total figures. I think if we're just looking at leasing fees in isolation, that makes it a little bit trickier. And also just wanting to put to administration that where we do have these handful of clubs that have a significant difference in leasing fees, is 4-year transition sufficient? Is it Is that enough where we've got a handful of clubs that are experiencing potentially much bigger increases than the rest, and we also have some in receiving decreases? Also just wanted to flag clause 4, which is about delegating the power to dispose property, where it's about a lease license or management agreement to category 1 or category 2 groups to the CEO. I know I can understand that that's about being administratively efficient, but has this considered council's assessment of the community benefit of a group using a city building?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll need to clarify that. My understanding was that that would be with the CEO too, but I haven't, yeah, we'll have to clarify that.
Well, I guess I'm raising that there's two things. There's about administrative efficiency, but there's also about council having the oversight of community benefit in terms of who and which community groups, who provides greatest community benefit is utilising city-owned buildings. So it's not just an efficiency question. Sorry about this. I have got annotated questions. I think I've probably covered them. Just double checking. Yes, and just a request if we could have a thorough proofread of the document just based on some of the feedback that we've received this evening. Okay, questions from council members on this item, or have we finished? Right, ready to move on. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll move on to item 5.3, lot 12 Newcastle Street, Perth, proposed third-party digital billboard sign. This is a section 31 reconsideration from the State Administrative Tribunal. Questions? Councillor Vatakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I just want to get some indication whether SAT gave a reason why they referred the matter back to us for reconsideration, if there was a particular reason given under the section 31.
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, there wasn't. The city at mediation indicated our position on the matter and requested to proceed to a hearing, and the applicant requested the opportunity to submit amended plans to the city and also to try and see if they could resolve Main Road's issue through this so that wouldn't need to be a matter if it proceeded to a hearing. So it was at the applicant's request that we go to a section 31 reconsideration.
Thank you. And just some understanding as to what the process would be should council choose to vary the original decision in any way.
So there's two, through you, Mayor Cole, there's two possible opportunities. So if the council was of the mind to alter its recommendation and recommend approval for the application, the matter would still need to progress through the tribunal because Main Roads haven't withdrawn their objection to the proposal. So unless we can get something before next week, there's still an issue under the Metropolitan Region scheme. If the council decided to proceed with the officer recommendation for refusal, then we would be looking to go to a hearing at the tribunal and the city would need to defend its position on that matter.
Yeah, so you've in part sort of answered my next question, because I just wanted to get some clarity onto that consideration onto the Main Roads report, considering that there is some debate as to some of the data that's been used on that. So until Main Roads actually alter their stance on that or alter their report, what consideration do us at council have to give to that?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So the application requires referral to Main Roads under the MRS, and we're required to have regard to that recommendation. Where we vary the recommendation, so if we're not of the same view and we want to recommend approval, then the delegation doesn't extend to the decision under the MRS. And that matter then goes through the tribunal and the state will have to resolve that part. We did receive a referral response from Main Roads, and it did flag their concerns. We went back to Main Roads and asked and provided them with the additional justification, additional information from the applicant, and specifically outlined the areas where the applicant had addressed their concerns and where we thought they needed to refer to, and requested that they provide us with further comments. And we haven't had any correspondence from them since the 17th of August. And again, the applicant followed up with the person from Main Roads who was party to the mediation proceedings and had made a commitment as to the areas that they required information on, and clarified that that information had been provided, and we've still been unable to receive a response from Main Roads on that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Acting Manager, wouldn't mind your thoughts. We've been sitting with this matter for some time. Do you see the reduction in the size of the screen as having an impact on the city's position?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in regards to the size of the screen, I think from the administration position and the policy position, we don't believe that addresses the objectives of the policy. I just wanted to flag Councillor Loden had his hand up too.
Thanks everyone for helping me with tiny Dan in that tiny box over there. I don't know if we can make you permanently larger. It'd be very helpful. Councillor Loden, you have a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it was just similar to Mayor Cole's question around, we received a number of photos suggesting that the development next door would sort of mitigates that issue of the sign obscuring the views of the city. I was just hoping to get a response from administration on that specific issue.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't think that in this administration report or in any of our discussions to date that there's been concern that this would impact on views to the city. It's that the size of the signage is inconsistent with the intent for that area and out of context with what's contemplated in the policy for signage. In looking at the DRP comments about the structure itself, I don't think that there's any contention that the structure is of a form that can be contemplated. It's the actual size of the sign and the content that would be displayed on the sign that's inconsistent with the signage policy.
Thank you, Manager. Councillor Loden, did you have any follow-up questions? Go ahead.
So then, in follow-up to that, so the applicant also raised with me concerns about that we already have signage in the city, third-party content, for example, the one across from Water Corp, and the signs that are in bus shelters. And I just was hoping to get a perspective from administration on that as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So I think as part of this proceedings, we'd identified that there have been 13 third-party signage billboards that exist across the city. 12 of those were approved by City of Perth. One of those is the one across from Water Corp, and that's on a 5-year term of approval that gets reviewed by council and has been considered on the basis that there's significant constraints to development on that site. In terms of the ad shelters, this is an agreement that the city has entered into for a period of 15 years and relates back to the maintenance of those shelters and provision of that signage. In terms of the acceptability of that and why we've chosen to do that, I probably couldn't comment on that. We can maybe get some advice through the briefing notes, but I'm not sure what that would seek to clarify other than the fact that the city has entered into a contract for 15 years with the bus shelters to provide that third-party content.
And I think we're all clear on this, but just probably for the sake of the public record, in relation to issues such as offers of City of Vincent advertising or local business advertising, would that be considered a valid planning consideration in council's determination of this matter?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't believe that there's anything under the planning framework that would allow that to be contemplated, and nothing in our policy contemplates an exchange for that public benefit.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay. Thanks, everyone. All right. So we have dealt with the 3 items that were raised by members of the public gallery this evening. So we'll go back to those items we haven't dealt with sequentially. So that takes us to 5.2, 338 to 342 Oxford Street, Leederville, change of use from educational establishment to place of worship. This is seeking an amendment to an approval. Any questions? Sun Life Church on Oxford Street. Okay. No questions, so we'll move on to 5.4, the City of Vincent Rebound Plan. Any questions on this item? No. Okay, Infrastructure and Environment, 6.1 Waste Strategy Project. Number 8, Commercial Waste Collections. Questions? Oh, Councillor Toppelberg is leaving the room. And Dan has got his hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. My question was just, I had a couple of queries in terms of the business case put forward. So the report talked about a $10,000 cost, but didn't include any staff time associated with doing this piece of work. And I was wondering if we knew if there, I assume there was staff time allocated to do this work initially, putting together the communication plan, and then there will be the rollout. Do we have an idea on those costs?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we have temporarily lost the executive director, but just to clarify that this report and this work was an action arising from the waste strategy which council endorsed, and the staff time and preparation for the implementation of those actions was budgeted into the team's business planning over the last 12 months.
Thank you. I guess what I'm probably trying to understand is I recognise that this is a fairly robust business case, but trying to understand more specifically what costs we're incurring in doing this work. So if there's one FTE staff member allocated to this to do all the rollout, then we probably should be considering that in the assessment of whether we should progress with this or not. So that was the reasoning behind my question. And I note that the director has now returned.
Through you, Michael, if I understand the question correctly, you're talking about you're asking about the cost of implementation, Council Loden. I think we've allowed $20,000 to recover the bins at the end of the service. So that's the additional cost. All other costs are contained within the existing budget.
Well, I guess my assumption is if we said now no, then the officer that was working on this would then be assigned to something else because they wouldn't be doing this work. So there's, I guess, an opportunity cost of that person's time as well.
Yeah, through you, Michael. Though, I mean, those costs are just business as usual, if that makes sense. So the only additional cost is that $20,000 that we require to retrieve the bins, which is above and beyond what we normally do.
Then on the revenue side of things, what sort of time frame would we assess this business case over? Is it a sort of a 10-year horizon or a 4-year horizon, or sort of in perpetuity?
Through Michael, perhaps Councillor Loden can expand on that question. When you talk about revenue, what are you referring to? So
I guess the revenue would be the reduction in costs for the city, the income that, or reduction in cost, or what as the case may be. So my understanding is that's about $900,000 a year. If you're putting together the business case, if you're looking at it over a 10-year horizon, that's nearly $9 million in savings for the city that we would see, plus the potential cost savings of not having to replace at least one, potentially 2 rubbish trucks in that time as well. So I'm just trying to get better understanding of what is the big picture of the value to the city of this decision.
Yeah, through you, Michael. Thanks for the clarification, Councillor Loden. You're correct. The savings is about $920,000 per annum, and we would look at it over a 10-year window, which is the term of the LTFP. and that's been modelled in one of the scenarios in the long-term financial plan. So you'll find it in there. And you're right, that over the 10 years, that is, more than $9 million in terms of a saving. And over that period, there is a truck that we would have to replace at least twice over that period, because we keep a waste truck between 4 and 5 years.
Thank you. And then I guess the other part of it, which is still to be determined by council, is the net benefit to the city depends on what we land on in terms of potential rebate to the commercial sector. Is that correct? So if we do 50% rebate, then half of that revenue would go away?
Yeah, through you, Michael, that's correct. It does depend on the rebate. If a rebate's to be agreed upon, it does depend on the amount of that rebate. I mean, currently in the long-term financial plan, there are two scenarios. One is a full rebate of the saving. Also, the saving is used to rebate for 1 year. And then after that, the rebate is finished. And then the second scenario is that the rebate is carried through for the full term of the long-term financial plan. Those are the two scenarios currently modelled there.
Right, thanks. So in my mind, that's kind of like the quantitative assessment of the business case. And then the opposite side of that is a qualitative assessment, then looks at the community impact around that. And the report talks to what those options look like for the businesses, depending on, it spells out a number of different options for different businesses, depending on how they sit. And then there is a cost associated for those businesses. And then depending on the rebate would then determine whether that's a cost to them, or a net cost to them, or a net benefit to them. Is that a fair assessment?
So we might call that as a fair assessment, yes.
And then I guess the other issue is the challenge for people in transitioning. Some businesses will be able to do that easily, but other businesses may struggle with that. And part of the mitigation of that is that the city will provide a backstop in the event that a business is not able to find an alternative waste provider. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, so through you, Michael, so the approach we're hoping to take is that businesses will get an early indication. So there'll be a 9-month period before the service will be discontinued. So they'll get a long period. We have no concerns that a commercial business won't be able to find a service. There are plenty of providers, and they are itching to get into the market. They're already in Vincent doing work, so they have indicated to us they would be more than happy. So we don't think there's going to be any problem finding anyone. The other bit of mitigation that we're proposing is lots of assistance to help the businesses transition. So whether that's advice, lists of contractors, etc. So we'll be doing that, and we'll be giving them advice on the type of services they should be looking for as well. So we'll be doing lots of that work over the next 9 months, and that's all in the communications plan attached to the report.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Council members. Okay, I'll jump in. I have a few questions. First of all, I note that there are, in the business case, there are scenarios that talk about a cafe, hairdresser, retail shop, and it demonstrates that this may be a cost saving to those small businesses. But I observed that in the report to council, there is no section in here that really addresses in any detail the positives for business or the community benefit. And I wondered if I could request that that information be brought out and highlighted in the report, so that could actually look at that in more detail and summarise that in the body of the report. I also wanted to ask whether, if a very small business wanted to just receive the residential 3-bin system, would they be able to receive that if they were given the option of taking the same system that we're rolling out to residents, and they were small enough for that to satisfy their need? Would that be an option for a commercial business?
Yes, through you, Michael, that was mentioned in the previous business case, I think. That is not impossible, obviously not our preferred option. but it could be done. And the previous business case talked about there being a charge for that service, because we do have fees and charges. So if we no longer provide a commercial service, then we would do that at cost.
It would be at cost. So they'd pay additional for it. Okay.
Yes, we might call, because we wouldn't be offering the service to commercial premises if they wanted to take effectively a domestic service, and we could accommodate that within the existing service because they're very small and it just would work for both parties. Then we would contemplate a charge for that, along the lines of the fees and charges, and it would be on a case-by-case basis as well.
Okay. The next question is around bin audits. And my understanding was that when we have previously talked about separate waste charges as part of our budgeting processes, there was to be bin audits undertaken. And I wondered what data we have available to give us an indication of how many of our commercial premises have legacy arrangements where they may have additional services per week or additional bins that they're not paying for.
Through you, Nicole, and it's possible that the manager of waste and recycling can add to this answer, but we do that on an ad hoc basis. So we have done bid audits in the past and identified legacy issues and exceptions, but we're still finding them, as we speak. So that is an ongoing process. As we find those exceptions, we are actually dealing with them.
Okay, but I guess if you're looking at a change and we're looking at people who may, if we have a situation where a commercial premises currently has extra bin allocations and they're not paying for them, then whilst that might not be in line with our policy, that would mean that they would have a significant increase in cost. Is there any way of estimating what that might look like with this change process?
If I can refer to the manager of waste and recycling, she might be able to add something. All I will say is they may not be paying now. And but if we found it today, obviously we would either remove the bins or ask them to pay. So that
I guess I'm just trying to get some idea of the magnitude. If it's like a significant problem, and we might find that 50% of our businesses have over allocations of bins that they're not paying for, and so the net impact to them in cost is significant, even, because we can look at what they should be entitled to, but we've also got to look at the reality of what it is that they're currently using. So is there any idea of what that might look like before we embark on this process?
Can the manager of waste recycling add something, perhaps?
Yes, through you, Nicole. At the moment, we are assessing them on a case-by-case basis. So I don't think we know, I don't think it's that huge a problem. But there certainly are some when they come through weekly at this stage. We might get the odd one, but as they come through, as the director said, we are putting them back within the waste policy and the allocations in there. But I can certainly look at that. We've got a list of all the commercial residencies, their number of bins, and the majority of those that we have now are in line with the policy.
Thank you, Manager. It would be good to get an idea, like if it's 5%, 10%, 15%. I think that would just help if we can get an idea of that before making this decision. The other comment I have is around the actual rebate. I think that, I'm not sure if Councillor Loden was referring to this previously, but in terms of actually making a decision on the business case, for me, I see the rebate as integral part of the decision making, and I don't think it's reasonable from a customer service perspective or from a council perspective to make this decision without actually knowing what the options are for the rebate. So my request is that we have some options presented as part of this decision. And I wanted to just ask about the $921,000 cost saving, because the report does talk about residential cross-subsidisation of commercial waste. So I just want to make sure that this, if we're looking at the $921,000, is that purely costs associated with the commercial waste, or is that an element of that really about the residents cross-subsidising that waste service? Because I think we need to actually look at what is that figure apportioned to commercial in order to make a decision about rebating.
Through you, Nicole.
Yes.
The 921,000 that we had is purely the commercial costs. So it's the cost of the vehicle, personnel, etc., cost of disposal, the cost of contracted recycling, disposal and collection services associated with all the commercial. So it's purely commercial costs.
That's great. Thank you. That's very useful clarification. So given that that is all attributed to commercial waste, could we have some options presented to council, even if it's on an in principle basis? Because one of the things I wanted to ask is perhaps it's the case that we won't know the impact on individual businesses until this happens, but could we at least have some in principle recommendations to council on what the rebate would look like if we're going to make this decision? Because in communicating this, I think that we will need to be in a position to say this: if there is a cessation of service, the question will be cost. Can we please have some rebate options so that we could satisfy that answer, which will, I think, be the first question from our commercial ratepayers.
Yeah, through my call, we can definitely do that. It's a simple division, really, the number of ratepayers versus the cost. So we can
So it
put
would
some
just be
options together.
straightforward $370 per business?
That is one of the calculations, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the result of one of the calculations.
But if we were in a situation where we found that some people were more impacted than others, is there a case that we might want to look at varying the subsidy according to impact?
That wasn't one of the models that we looked at, because I think what you pay in rates is not related to what service you get in waste, if that makes sense. So there's no correlation there.
Well, it is a service and it's a cost.
Yeah, but I think rates is paid on GRV, and the service you get is based on the type of business and the size of so there's no relation when we looked at that in the past.
But then the rebate's not based on GRV. The rebate's just a flat rebate across the board.
Yeah, which would share the cost of the service amongst all ratepayers.
I'm just thinking of a scenario where you're a tiny business and you might have 2 bins, and then you're a huge warehouse and you have 25 bins. $370 to a tiny business compared to the huge warehouse is quite a substantial difference. Is there any way to treat the rebate to treat the level of waste service?
I think we'd have to give that some thought. I'm not sure that's an easy thing to do, but I mean, there are finance people that are clever than I am at that, so we'll see what we can come up with.
Okay. All right. So I guess my request is that personally, I would want a rebate option on the table in order for this decision to be made next week. I'm flagging that if I personally don't have that, I'm not in a position to make this decision. I appreciate very much the work that's been done to give an outline of the example services, and as mentioned, it'd be good to bring that into the report. And I would also just like to add that I think that this report really needs to have more of a focus on their external service delivery perspective, and not just about the cost savings to the city or our own strategic objectives, but also our forward-facing service delivery to our commercial ratepayers. And I think that will come from giving examples of the benefits to commercial ratepayers. Yeah, that was my last question.
Check. Okay, I think that's working. Just to confirm that the recently adopted long-term financial plan of council did contemplate 2 scenarios for discontinuation of the commercial waste service, and the first scenario we listed as scenario 2 was the reduction in expenditure with a full offset to in terms of reduction in rates. So that'll be of very little financial benefit to the city going forward. And the second scenario was discontinuation of the commercial waste service with a year 1 rate rebate only. And we had those that modelling included in those 2 scenarios in the LTFP, and we can bring that those options into this report for council consideration of whether one or both of those would be adopted.
Is there an option 3 where you could actually look at a phased rebate over a certain period of time, as opposed to 1 year only or every year? Is there some middle ground that we could potentially also see?
Through your Mayor Cole, yes, the option that'll be at council's discretion, and there's different ways that you could apply that rebate in terms of percentage of the total expenditure reduction or how many years that was applied across.
Okay, well, could we perhaps have some modelling done to look at a third option, which is more of a transitional arrangement? And finally, could we have a section in the report on the impact on the long-term financial plan of the different models?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, and the quick answer on that would be that if council did proceed with this decision, that it would essentially mean an amendment to the long-term financial plan to adopt either scenario 1, 2, either scenario 2 or 2A, or a variation of those depending on the rebate that council proceeded with. So we'd probably formalise that in the LTFP because that would essentially be the budget setting parameters for the city going into next year.
And also just in relation to this attachment that's been provided to council, does this form part of the report to council now?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't included it in the report at this stage, but all the information is listed in the scenarios. We just didn't have time to formally put this into the report. I should note that the manager could explain this better than I could, that this is essentially scenarios and every single business would probably have their own unique circumstances. So we're just trying to compare our current service against a commercial service with public and advertised rates, which is what the City of Perth currently offers.
Well, could this is quite useful information. Could this be provided as part of the report to the council meeting next Tuesday?
Yeah, through my call, we could attach it to the report, yeah.
Thank you. And just one final thing, just in relation to the recommendation to council, it's quite limited. I just wondered whether it could perhaps have some additional information included in the recommendation. I'm happy to put this up as an amendment, and I'm happy to flag this as an amendment if necessary, but I think that it's important context that this this review of commercial waste is also triggered by the introduction of the 3-bin FOGO system for residents, and talks about the fact that we don't have a fit for purpose streamed service that an external commercial service could provide and likely result in cost savings as demonstrated in the modelling. I think these are important points, and I think a recommendation to council is actually an opportunity to give a bit more of a rationale about why you would recommend this approach to council. But if administration does not think that's important, I'm happy to put up an amendment.
Through my call, there was a similar note recommendation in the initial report, so we could look back to that and replicate that and add something if we need to.
I mean, obviously that's your call,
Yeah,
and we'll see what comes out.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all from me. Councillors? Okay, I've exhausted you all with my line of questioning. Okay, sorry about that. It's important. All right, next item is 6.2, Manor Inc. Meal Service at World Square. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. I just have a query in relation to the information in the report about the Moore Street precinct. It appears that the precinct's currently operating, if I read it right, from 4:30, and whether there has been any discussion or application around the expansion of those hours to a lunchtime kind of service.
Yeah, through you, Michael. We have asked that question. The answer we've been given is it's a 12-month trial, so they're not intended to change the times at this stage.
Could you refresh my memory and when that trial is due to be evaluated?
Through you, Michael. Can I take that question on notice?
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Given that the current agreement concludes on the 30th of November 2020, and it's proposed that there'll be a further update on the 17th of November ordinary meeting of council, would it not be prudent for a recommendation 5 for council to add a recommendation 5 that flags its intent as to whether or not it will seek to continue the service? Because otherwise we sit here on the 17th and potentially say no, and what are we doing in 3 days? Because if there's no alternative at that point, so my guess is this is the last opportunity for council. So I guess that's my question. I'm happy to do it via amendment next week, but whether administration has a view on whether it would recommend the service continue at Weld Square, regardless of how the negotiations or the discussions proceed, but would it not, in the interest of procedural fairness, be good for council to indicate a position beyond November 2020 at the next week's meeting?
Yeah, so through you, Michael, we have considered that. What we are anticipating is that the next council will have by then we'll have received an application, and that is the point at which we would recommend whether or not to grant permission or not. That's assuming that we do have an application. I say we anticipate we will. That doesn't mean that we will, but we anticipate we will, and we feel that that's the appropriate time as administration to recommend whether to approve that permission or not.
Okay, so notwithstanding, I will likely just flag an amendment to add a new 5. I haven't decided what my view is yet, but to have a new 5 that will give an indication as to what may, assuming that the current arrangements persist, whether council has intent to look beyond November 2020 with the current arrangement.
Councillors, I just want to make sure that all options are exhausted before we make this decision, given that council was viewing this year as a transitional year to give some potential recreational respite to Manor Inc. Could there be discussions with City of Perth prior to next week about the hours at the Moore Street precinct? Could we have confirmation in writing from Manor Inc., or, well, it doesn't have to be formal, but just an email or even verbally, about whether they would be prepared to consider working from Moore Street for a couple of days a week, or to have a sort of shared arrangement across Weld Square and Moore Street? Or would there be any other consideration around the way in which they operate at Weld Square, just given the fact that there have been indications made publicly about this being a transitional arrangement, and that we would be trialling having no services at Weld Square to see what impact that might have. I just want to make sure that before council makes this decision, that we have absolute clarity around any other options for Manor Inc. And whether we could, either maintain, reduce or remove the service. And if we did either of those things, what the implications would be. If we maintain the service, what are the implications for the local residents and businesses? Do we need to consult with them, because we haven't actually consulted with them in some time over having Manor Inc. at Weld Square? We've just been given the 12-month rolling approvals without actually touching base with our residents and commercial businesses. I just think we really need to clarify what we are doing in relation to accreditation and the City Homelessness Response Framework, and if we could have some information in the report about that, and perhaps we could also get some information from the Uniting West outreach workers about their observations at Weld Square at mealtime and the sorts of people that are receiving the meals. And also, could I request that Manor Inc. also give some advice about the people that are receiving meals that aren't homeless, and whether we could channel some of our food bank provision to those people, whether that might be a service that they would like to take up. I just want to make sure that administration's been exhaustive in these discussions and options before we make a decision, because this is quite a critical decision for council. And if we are going to consult, I would like to sort of factor in when and how, and what that would mean in terms of an approval period.
Yeah, through Michael, I've made notes there, so we'll be able to do what we can in the next week before council.
Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a further question, just my understanding or my reading of the comments from Manor Inc. on page 201, which says they suggest a number of their clients, the regular clients, do not identify as homeless and therefore do not access or wish to access other homeless support services. Can we clarify with them, because my reading of that, and I'd like it clarified, is that regardless of whether the service is relocated or there are other services that are catering to people who are experiencing homelessness and that is being addressed, that their that Manor Inc. are of a view that this location and this service at this spot is a necessity, regardless of what else is available elsewhere. That's how I read their both their actions and their comments over many years in relation to Weld Square and the service that they provide. My understanding is that they are not of a view that the service is relocatable. There are other services they could offer elsewhere, but that they are of the view that a service at Weld Square should continue regardless of any other services that are provided in any other location.
Yeah, through you, Michael. So we'll certainly ask Manor Inc. that question. And you're right, our conversations with them, they differentiate between people who are homeless and people who can't feed themselves. So they do have a home, but they struggle after they pay their rent to feed themselves. So that's some of the clients, which is the reason for the comment. But we'll certainly ask them that question.
Councillors? Councillor Vatakis?
Through you, Mayor, just want to get some clarity on when we're next due for an update on the funding that has been given to Uniting Care West for the outreach workers. Understanding the last lot of funding was for 3 months.
Yes, through my call. I'm aware of that funding through the Gardens Trust, and I'll find out when that review is due.
Any further questions on Manor Inc? Okay. Moving to Community and Business Services, 7.1 lease of community building at Woodville Reserve, 10 Farmer Street, North Perth, Wadjuk Northside Aboriginal Community Group. Any questions? No questions. Oh, Councillor Hallett.
Can I just confirm that the Northside Group weren't willing or interested in co-locating?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
That's a good question, Councillor Hallett. Further to that, could we just clarify, do they need to use the whole building? Just because we're currently looking for a location for a tool library. So just their space requirements as well would be useful to know.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we'll look into both of those things.
Thank you. Any further questions on 7.1? Okay. 7.2 we have dealt with, so I'll move to 7.3, advertising of amendments purchasing policy. Any questions? No. Okay. 7.4, investment report as at 31st of July 2020. Any questions? 7.5, financial statements as at 31st of July 2020. Any questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So just in relation to some of the favourable variances and particularly the parking activities, and I appreciate that you've been in the role for only 3 days, so I'm asking the question of the city, not necessarily of you as the acting executive director, but we're less than 40 days since we made the decision in relation to the city's budget, and we're given some pretty strict numbers about, we know that it was worst case scenario, but given that we were into July before we made the decisions, it's quite disconcerting to see some of the numbers being so, yes, it's a windfall, but we've also effectively taken that money from community and rates for income foregone because we assumed that we weren't going to be getting some of these monies in. Some relates to BD Park, some relates to car parking. I guess in the event that the situation in relation to COVID and usage of particularly parking in BD Park remains on the current trajectory, can we please receive some information as to how this affects both the long-term financial plan and how that money is over time to be returned to community, because effectively we've taken it in rate increases this year on the basis of it being a disaster year when the numbers early on indicate that it's not necessarily the case.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify, we didn't increase the total rate revenue for the city this financial year, but held actually reduced overall.
It's two
rate
sides. It's
revenue.
two sides of the same coin. That is understood. This side didn't imply that we increased rates, but we did take rates on the basis of reduced levels of income and the level of service we were providing. And less than a month after that decision, we can see that that level of income from some of those key areas is significantly higher than what was presented to council. So I'm just curious as to how over time we intend to return those funds to ratepayers.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we are already starting to prepare our first quarterly budget review based on these trends that we've seen, which are positive for the city and positive for the ratepayers in general.
Well, I was going to ask a very similar question, but it was going to be, is a 70.5% increase in revenue from operating activities too early to call a trend? But I mean, this is why we have introduced quarterly budget review. We haven't taken a rates increase this year. We've had GRV, which has meant some individuals have unfortunately seen an increase, some have seen a decrease, majority have seen a decrease or stayed the same. But I think it's about restoring services and restoring programs that we have held back on, and that's when will be the first budget review coming to council, when we'll actually be in a position to approve it.
We're starting to work through that with officers in September. So I'd say it'd probably be in October, possibly November, just depending on the workload at the moment. So recommendations will come through. And once again, depending on the COVID state and any other directions from the Chief Medical Officer and the state government will affect.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I would really like to get a program of budget review and know the dates that it would be coming to council for the year. Could we perhaps get an update on that? Because I think we need to lock in the dates and prioritise that as a key body of work this year, because as soon as we do that, we can start to restore services and programs that we've pulled back on.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can include the schedule of those dates for the quarterly budget reviews in the briefing notes.
Any further questions on financial statements? Okay. 7.6, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st of July to 31st of July 2020. Any questions? No. Okay, Chief Executive Officer items. The first item, 8.1, adoption of the Corporate Business Plan 2021 to 2023-24 and Capital Works Program 2020-21 to 23-24. Councillor Gontaszewski.
I have a few questions. And I'm just going to go through them. That probably go across a number of different areas, and I'm happy for them to be taken on notice. In the format of the report, where it talks in the strategic projects area of the corporate business plan, it talks about the cost and the in year one. And I just want to check what the difference is between an additional cost and a new cost, and an existing operational cost and a nil cost in relation to that particular column in the report. Sorry, this is on the pages that start on page 26 of the CBP, the strategic projects. 14 of the document on my page.
Through you, Mayor Cole, so we've added the budgeted amount for additional costs into that first year as approved in the annual budget. And then we've highlighted where it might be coming from the existing operational or capital budget. And we've highlighted the numbers that are budgeted over and above what was in the existing operational or existing capital works budget.
Just say that we approved this document at the same time we approved the budget. Is there any existing operational budget aside from, or capital budget, like, or are we talking carry forwards or costs, new one? And I guess the difference between an additional cost and a new cost.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there are 2 or 3 references to new. Is that what you're, I think
Just
it'd
so
be,
like FOGO is new, whereas the line above it is the implementation of the SES is additional.
through you, Mayor Cole, I think we can clarify that. We did have a key previously, but I think that is confusing. So I agree with the premise of the question. We'll clarify that and put the key back into that table.
Now I have a question about the ticks versus the dashes versus the dollars. Mayor Cole, I believe I've asked this. This is the 3rd time I'm asking this question, so I'm going to get it sorted in my head before next week. So I'm just going to refer to, in the strategic project listing, CBP item 1, the implementation of the Sustainable Environment Strategy. It's got dollars in the first 3 years and then a tick in the 4th year. What's the difference between the dollars and the tick? And in the 4th year, what, if any, dollars were included in the LTFP that was adopted in relation to this item?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so the way that table's formulated is that if we've got an identified number, which is additional budgeted expenditure, or in the capital works program, we've included the number. A dash means no planned activity, whereas a tick means there's a strategy or plan to do something, but we haven't got council approval for what that funding amount could be in those outer years. So for instance, we've got, we can already anticipate sustainable environment strategy implementation costs for those 3 years and what they will be, but it hasn't been defined for the 4th year, but we've got a 5-year strategy. So we'll have to come back to council to update that at a subsequent iteration of the annual update.
Okay, thank you. And so for item 4, in relation to monitoring and reporting on the 40-kilometre speed zone trial, that has an additional cost in year 1. It's talking about existing operational. So I'm presuming that that's staff time. And so that means that we're intending on spending some staff time in 2021 and 21-22 on the monitoring and reporting of the 40-kilometre-an-hour speed trial, but we don't know how much staff time that is, so we can't put a number there, or where things are intended just to be staff time, we're just using ticks.
Through Mayor Cole, the ticks would indicate that it wouldn't be a abnormal budget item or that requires additional funding for that project. For instance, some of the funding and support is through the state government and the Road Safety Commission. We've essentially expended the expenditure part of that program through the cost of installation of the signs in the area and the release of it. The tick just indicates that we'll be spending staff time, but no additional staff are going to be put on onto the payroll to implement that.
Okay, so the Arts Development Action Plan item, there's the development has ticks in 2 years, but when I look at the KPI, it talks about the development of the plan is to be delivered in January 2021. So I'm just wondering what's happening in the next 18 months that would give it 2 ticks. And is it just intended that because we're going to develop the plan, it's going to be written in and delivered in 2021. We think that we'll be doing something in the plan in 21-22, but we don't have any money. We're not putting any money towards that at this point in time. We're just going to be spending staff time on that work.
Through Mayor Cole, yeah, that is correct. So existing operation on the tick would mean that staff time and resources within that staff time and resources being allocated to the project.
The Leaderville Activity Centre plan has a dollar allocation in year 1 and a tick in year 2. I understand what the tick is for on the basis of our conversation. Given that this document has been some time in coming, I'm presuming that the tick in year 2 is maybe assuming we might be waiting for Planning Commission or someone like that. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes. So there are still some legacy consultancy costs associated with that project in this financial year. There'll still be staff time allocated to implementing that or finalising it, which could be essentially 12 months after it's been submitted to the Planning Commission, but that'll be within existing staff resources. It wouldn't necessitate additional external consultancy costs.
And I'm correct, because I think you answered this question when you answered Councillor Loden's question in relation to the waste strategy projects, was that the way that we are estimating our project costs does not include a proportion of costs associated with staff time where a permanent FTE staff member is assigned to work on that project. So we don't really have a sense of the full cost of the project because it doesn't include staff time. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, very good question. We are debating this internally because we've got, there's 26 strategic projects here. We are trying to capture within the project planning the allocation of internal staff time, more or less how many FTE are involved across the organisation for the purposes of the corporate business plan and budgeting, where there's an additional FTE or half an FTE, 0.5, and particularly if that required an additional 12-month contract, for instance, then we'd draw that out and highlight that to council's attention. Otherwise, and we can provide further advice to council on this, we are calculating internal staff time against these projects as operational expenditure.
I recognise that's a really challenging thing to do in project management. Well, I've always found it hard, but from the CBP, how do I determine what the cost is associated with providing our domestic waste service?
I might ask, through Mayor Cole, might ask the director to respond to that.
Yes, Mayor Cole, if I can take that on notice, I'll find it in. I mean, I can tell you what the cost is, but
I'm not asking you what the cost is. I want to know how I'll know what the cost is without being in this chamber.
Okay.
Okay, so I know some of these I've written and then you've sort of answered them, but I'm going to just do the clarification thing anyway. So we don't have any funds on the CBP for the operation of the community centre beyond 2021, or we'll assume that beyond 2021 it becomes, you know, operation. We're currently employing contractors, but beyond 2021 it'll just be staff time for the City of Vincent Community Centre. I note there's 31K for year one costs.
Through Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice to clarify that. And through Mayor Cole, just to clarify the previous response, we have included in this version of the corporate business plan on page 23, financial summary by city service area, where each of the service areas are listed with their expenses, revenues over the 4 years. And for instance, the waste and recycling, the domestic waste service would potentially cover 70, 80% of that entire service, but we can break that down in more detail.
And so, for example, like the city provides water safety and awareness services. They would have a probably, I would presume, a net benefit to the city. How would we determine that if that's a focus area for the city, how would we determine what the cost or income associated with that activity was from the CBP? Yeah, happy for that one to be taken on notice. Are we running a seniors program in 23-24? I had a question on that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll clarify that in the briefing notes. Whether or not we are using the Loftus Community Centre as the focus for our seniors activities. I'll just clarify whether or not that stands as a separate line item or whether those costs have been essentially merged within that one team for the seniors work we're doing through the Loftus Community Centre.
Cool. So I note in the CVP, it talks about for civic functions, it talks about that there's a $49,000 cost for year one. And then there's no cost information for years 2, 3 and 4. On the basis of what we've spoken about, I would take that to mean that we know we're probably going to run some civic functions, but we haven't assessed or estimated what the costs associated with them would likely be. And so they're not present in this CBP and they're also not present in our LTFP. So that 50K approximately is not currently reflected in what we've said that we need to gather in rates, and without another source of income that we need to then add another 50,000 a year to our LTFP to cover the civic events if we're going to hold them beyond this year.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, that's correct. So we've got a budget allocation through the adopted budget for civic events. We know we'll have civic events the following year, but we haven't got council approval for what that line item could be.
But I guess but if we know we're doing civic events and we know that there'll be a cost associated with them, that's beyond staff time, because I presume that the staff time is included in the LTFP. Is correct? Yeah. So I guess we don't have a reason to say that council wouldn't approve funding for civic events. Indeed, we have an obligation to conduct certain civic events. So you're telling me that at this point in time, there's no funding in the LTFP and reflected in what we've said we'll charge the community for rates for civic events in the next 3 years of the business plan, just in the first year. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, their staff times captured in the LTFP and the employee costs overall. The way the corporate business plan and the attachment for the capital works program is set out is that the only approval we have is for year one, which is council approval for the budget in the year one, which is where we've got a specific decision from council for that year, as well as the adoption of the capital works program. So year one is accurate, and essentially years 2, 3, and 4 would either be strong estimates or strong projections, and some of those, and that has been aligned to the LTFP, which is also adopted by council.
I need to think on that because I'm still not sure that I've had my question answered on that one. From the corporate business plan, how do we know how much we spend on greening per year? I know it's in the capital works program, but I'm presuming there's a separate document. So if our community wanted to understand, given the enormous benefits of greening to our community, how much we were spending on greening and whether they would, like to comment on whether we should be spending more or less, where would they find that information?
Through Mayor Cole, in that financial summary table, the Parks and Reserves budget is captured in, I think, page 14.
The Parks and Reserves is in the page 14.
Through Mayor Cole, in this financial summary table for each service area.
Yeah. But greening as in planting trees might not take up all of that budget. And there is a line item in the capital works program for the greening. Is that correct? Yes, there is. So I guess that question just goes to that there is information available in our capital works program about elements that are listed as, or actually I don't even think greening is listed as a strategic project, that there might be some disparity between the two documents. There is a KPI associated with Parks Upgrade and Renewal Program, and that KPI is that playground expenditure is reduced. Why is that KPI there, and how does that align with our public open space strategy that talks about developing an appropriate level of service for our parks and reserves?
Through you, McCall. I believe that's an efficiency target, but I can get some information on that and add it to the notes.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to comment on that, the general approach for playground replacement is to, what we're trying to do when we look at each playground replacement is not replace like for like, which tends to be heavy on the plastic and the metal, but try to replace with lower costs, nature play, and other elements which don't have such a high capital expenditure with the mandatory softball and the mandatory playgrounds which we installed 10 and 15 years ago.
Which strategic document is that decision being made in alignment with? Like, we don't have an asset plan that says we need to reduce playground expenditure through selection of playground equipment that has a lower maintenance cost. And our public open space strategy talks about alignment with level of service. I don't believe it references a move towards nature play away from plastic fantastic, although I am in agreement with it. But I do think the best nature play actually costs quite a bit of cash. Happy to move on. Hold on.
I'm just checking in for how many more questions we have, Councillor Gonchefsky. Just
Oh,
get
is
an
this
idea.
a council meeting where I have a time limit, or am I
No, but
unlimited?
I think I might have to start thinking about it.
Yeah. Will the city be reporting against all of these I will confirm that a number of these questions have been asked previously. Will the city be reporting against all KPIs in the quarterly CBP updates, or will they be reported annually? Is there a reporting frequency associated with the KPIs that have been presented?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, we have not developed a reporting framework for those service area KPIs, but they are being informed by the benchmarking report, which we're participating in for the second time this year, and we'll be reporting against the 26 strategic projects at the front of the document as well.
Cool. Has there been a sense check done in relation to, that's a term that the Executive Director for Community Business uses, and I like it. Has there been a sense check done in relation to the KPIs versus the spend? I note that the delivery of place management programs and town team grants, $60,000, has a KPI of 20% notable increase in visitors to town centres by 21-22. And I feel that that might be stretching things. And I guess I don't have an expectation that we would be able to meet that. And I don't necessarily know how, are we using the culture counts to report against that? Is that the idea?
Through you, Mayor Cole, some of the KPIs are aspirational to try to stretch the service and how we're trying to perform against what we have been doing. And some of those KPIs wouldn't be entirely in the city's control because they'd be influenced by economic factors. But I can provide more information on particularly how we're trying to promote more, attract more people into the town centres, and part of that does relate to the actions in the rebound plan as well.
The capital work program document has reference numbers such as CBP 1.3 that refers to our solar voltaic panel system installation, but I can't actually find this in the CBP document. Is there a reason for this? I note that SES initiatives in the CBP is item 1, but I don't see a 1.3, and I'm wondering if I'm missing something.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think those are referring to the old CBP numbers. So all the strategic projects used to have a number, but we will have to review that and check. And we haven't given, we've given the strategic projects the number 1 to 26 now. So we'll review.
So we're planning on spending $410,000 on depot renewals at some point. And the only place that we would see that $410,000 piece of work in the CBP is as part of the overarching engineering service area budget. Is that correct?
Yeah, through you, Nicole. Yeah, the budgets in the CBP are high level, if that's the easiest way to describe it.
Yes. So in the item 14 of the strategic project listing talks about public open space strategy, and it has capital costs of nothing in 2021, 50 in 21-22, 300 in 22-23, and 780 in 23-24. In the capital works program, the CBP item 4.5, it talks about public open space strategy implementation plan of having 130,000 in 22-23. And it doesn't appear to have anything in future years. And I'm just wondering, is that they're not the same thing? And how do I reconcile between the two if I was looking for information on what the city is planning on spending on our public open space strategy implementation, or I guess within the CBP in relation to what our expenditure would be around improvements to our parks and reserves?
Yeah, so through you, Michael, you're right. The capital works program contains the 130,000, which I believe is next year. That's purely for projects that we've committed to in the public open space strategy. Obviously, there's still an ongoing discussion about where the funding would come from. There will be other things in the capital works program that improve parks as well, but they're not necessarily specifically identified in the public open space strategy, if that answers the question. If you're suggesting there's a mismatch between the CBP and the capital works program, that's something that we need to check because we wouldn't want that to occur. That is a potential error, but we'll check that.
Oh, well, there is the only one that I've found in terms of doing the proper check is the capital works program lists, I think, $180,000 for the development of the development plan for Haynes Street Reserve, and the capital, the CBP has $178,000, and I'd like to know how much was actually put into the LTFP.
Yeah, through my call, we can check that.
I may have some more questions via email, but I'll leave it for now.
Thank you. Councillors? I have some, but I'll rattle them off very, very quickly. So in relation to the corporate business plan, I very quickly just wanted to make sure that the strategic focus areas for 2020-21, if we could just check those against the CO KPIs once they're approved. And also just in relation to the strategic projects, I'm not sure if I've missed a page, but I've only got 21, not 26. And I just wanted to make sure that all of the projects that would be listed in the CO's KPIs once adopted could also be in this table, because there's a few that are not present, such as the, unless I'm missing a page, the asset sustainability strategy, the accessible city strategy, Beatty Park Leisure Centre 2062, the communications plan, etc. There's a few key ones.
Through Mayor Cole, page 31 on the version I've got has 22 Beatty Park, 23 Beatty Park upgrades, 24 asset management sustainability strategy.
Yes, I seem to be missing page 31.
31, yeah, and that includes 25 public health plan and 26 is the marketing and communications
I go
plan.
30 to 32. So, okay, I'll check
You-
page 31.
That's an important page.
It is a very important page. It's got all my favourites on it.
And just to clarify through you, Mayor Cole, that we're holding a page to incorporate the CO KPIs once adopted into this document as well, to make sure that they're 100% aligned.
Thank you. And just very quickly in relation to the capital works program, because I feel that once we adopt it, we are accepting this. I'm just reflecting on the fact that the fleet management program is nearly $3.7 million over the 4 years. And I wanted to request a business case to council on the fleet management program when the time is right. So we can review that, given the level of expenditure. And just in relation to miscellaneous asset renewal, I assume that's all sort of compliancy type things, but again, it's a large figure that's unallocated to a specific buildings. I note that the DLGSC building is noted to have solar voltaic panels in 2023. So I just wanted to check whether they'll be repaying the city for those panels. I think in terms of expenditure, you know, that's another consideration of whether we wish to spend more. I note that under land and building asset renewal projects, administration centre renewals is listed twice, 2 separate lines. So it would be good to just have that as one line. Public renewal of toilets, looks like there's not a lot being spent on toilets, just flagging that. And we have previously raised the issue of exercise equipment and whether it's contemporary and well used, but there is a few mentions here of replacement of exercise equipment in the, I think Forest Park is slated for 21-22 and then in the outer years for other areas. And that was it. Any further questions on CBP or the 4-year capital works program? Okay. 8.2, repeal of the City of Vincent Parking and Parking Facilities Amendment Local Law 2020. Any questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Just for clarity, so the effect is summarised as the delaying of the parking machines, but just to be sure there's no financial implications at all in terms of contracts looking at changing machines, machine maintenance, etc. There's no implications. We hadn't agreed to do something that we now can't do.
Through you, Mayor Cole, no.
Any further questions?
I
Councillor
will. I'll
Takis?
jump in. I just want to get some clarity that, as this previously was an amendment to the local law, that the 2007 local law still stands.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's the purpose of this decision. So we're saying that the amendment local law that went to the Joint Standing Committee to be gazetted as law is not going to have any force and effect. So we will be going back to the current local law, which is the 2007 one.
Does that mean we still have the 24-hour rule? Oh, the 24-hour rule raises its head. Interesting.
Can't get rid of the 24 hours, man.
I was quite fond of the 24-hour rule. Not sure how I feel about that. Any other questions on the local law repeal? Okay. 8.3, outcome of advertising and adoption of amendments, execution of documents policy. Any questions? 8.4, outcome of advertising and adoption of meeting procedures policy. Any questions? 8.5, advertising of new policy, policy development and review policy. Any questions? I did have a question. Oh, you go first because I have to find the spot.
Mine relates just to the timeline for bringing the updated policy review plan for discussion.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that will be coming to the council workshop in September, so a few weeks away.
Lovely.
Manager, I've just been having a read through this and I was just trying to find the part where we talked about early engagement with council on, or, you know, council involvement in objective setting, which was one of the key things I was interested in. So I was looking at clauses 1.3 and 4.2, but I couldn't quite see it there. I'm not sure if I'm missing it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think it's in clause 1.3. So that's talking about objective agenda and agenda setting. And it says objective and agenda setting is to occur in consultation with elected members. Elected members will be provided with the following information. So that talks about what we provide. And then, like you said, clause 4.1 talks about the formation of an objective or agenda position is to occur in consultation with elected members. So the idea of those two clauses is to say we...
Yep, so it's more in that, yeah, okay. What's the agenda position or agenda setting in this context?
So in terms of, through you, Mayor Cole, so in terms of the purpose of the policy and what we're trying to achieve.
Oh, okay.
So,
yep, no, I'm satisfied with that. Thank you for that. Are there any further questions on the policy review policy setting and policy review policy? We just need to make it a triple P. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just, does it talk about referring back to the long-term financial plan at all? In any of the decisions that, where it says here, objective and agenda setting, that we're provided with the following information? Should any of that refer back to the long-term financial plan?
Through Mayor Cole, the policy is largely based around the initial alignment with the strategic community plan, and then it is framed in the local government hierarchy. So if there were any financial implications of a policy change, that would require a council awareness and decisions. So often these policies are about our decision making. A lot of any budget decision making would need to go back to council by default if there was a change in our current expenditure or change to the annual budget process.
So it could fit in under 1.3 where it talks about elected members will be provided with the following information. So at the outset, when you're getting the detailed background, you could get some, potential impacts on the city's long-term financial position could be added as a dot point under 1.3.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we could add that. It is probably, it's referenced more in the broad on the local government decision-making hierarchy table, which we have now, which does reference the integrated planning and reporting framework, which includes the long-term financial plan, asset management plan, etc. But we could add that to the policy document to make that clearer. The top of the local government decision-making hierarchy document reference that a local government is also required to plan for the future, have a long-term financial plan, corporate business plan, annual budget, etc. So we could make that link clearer in the actual policy document.
But I guess when you consider the way we've approached this in the past, probably the economic rebound plan is one of the first time that we've really said these are the unfunded actions. In, like, you know, there is a bit of a shift, so it might be worth highlighting, and that could be done via amendment if you wanted to, Councillor Smith.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll definitely strengthen language on financial and budget stability.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? 8.6, new lease to Bethany Group, Inc., Royal Park, West Perth. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, just a couple of things I just wanted to check on this, whether there was any consideration under some of the principles of the property management framework when forming this lease.
Through you, Mayor Cole, this property would be considered a Category 3 property, and the terms proposed are consistent with the draft property management framework.
Thank you. And just clarity on the frequency of painting, 1.8. It just says painting, but doesn't give an indication as to the frequency expected.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in our new leases and in accordance with the property management framework, we're looking at them being repainted to ensure that the surfaces remain in good repair. So previously it's been stipulated you need to paint every 5 years, but that hasn't really been complied with and isn't always appropriate. So you have to keep the premises in good repair, and then when a tenant was leaving the premises, an inspection would be carried out, and if it's not in good repair, they'll be required to repaint. So this is, in our view, a better clause in the lease to ensure the painting remains in an appropriate condition.
So that's, I suppose, more a make good sort of clause rather than how is that monitored within the terms of the lease?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'd be including it as a maintenance condition, but I understand also that at the expiry of the lease, they need to ensure it's in the appropriate condition. We'd monitor this throughout the lease by doing annual inspections. So then if an annual inspection identifies that the paintwork needs repair, then we'd issue them with a notice. And then also we'd do the final inspection, like you said, to ensure it's left in an appropriate condition.
Do we, through you, Mayor, do we have any indication of the numbers or percentage of local residents that use the service?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm pretty sure we did ask for that, and apologies. Oh, David, the CEO's advised me that it's 32%. I think that's in the report.
Apologies for missing that. And I just want to look at that $500 contribution to the annual maintenance costs. Do we know what our total costs are?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so we previously haven't recouped those costs, so we've calculated based on what the city spends and estimates it's about $500. So now we're including that in the lease fee, so we will be covering our costs.
That's it from me, Mayor.
Anything more on Bethany? Okay. 8 point. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to check in relation to the area. I need to just check. I had a note that in the confidential report, there was a council briefing agenda. Now I'm trying to get back to my page.
While you do that,
thank you.
Can I ask a question on an earlier item that I forgot to ask? I probably shouldn't do this because it could start something. But I forgot to ask in relation to the lease, community leasing framework, Robertson Park, the Helverston Hall artists raised why they were category 3. They seem to think that they shouldn't be.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So the Helverston Hall artists are not a not-for-profit incorporated association. So they're just individual artists that lease the building together, like a joint partnership, that kind of arrangement. So category 1 and 2, I believe, are only applicable for incorporated associations, not-for-profits, registered charities, sporting groups. So they don't fall within the scope. And they could, and we have discussed with them the option of becoming an incorporated association. And I believe they've looked into that and it's not suitable for them.
Okay. Are they seeing a big increase in fee?
Through you, Mayor Cole, category 3 tenants, their lease fee is based on a market rental valuation. So we haven't got a current market rental valuation for Helverston Hall, but their lease has expired and they're occupying pursuant to the holding over provision. So we will be getting that shortly, and then we'll have a report back to council on that. So we would be recommending, in line with the draft property management framework, a rent that's consistent with the market rental valuation.
Okay, that's one to look forward to. Sorry, Councillor Gondaszewski, over to you. Thank you.
Just in relation to the premises area in this report is listed as 562 square metres, and I need to go to the other one now.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I have actually just noticed that. So in the valuation, it says the total area is 398 square metres, and in the report, it's slightly different. I will check that and we'll update the report or get the valuation report changed so that they're correct. But their area is just the building, that courtyard, and the car park area.
Yep. So the proposed rent based on the market rent valuation is $1,500 per annum. What would the rent be if we did the 10% GRV model? Do we have do we have access to a landscape valuation for that, just for the purpose of comparison between a commercial evaluation at this stage in the current market and the other property framework, given some of the concerns about the GRV model being proposed for the framework?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's a good question, and I'll have a look into that. The gross rental valuation for that property should also, you would assume, be relatively low. So the valuer did advise it's so low because that building has only a specific purpose, and they look at the use, so it's a community use, so that's taken into account. So I'm not sure actually of Landgate how they calculate the gross rental valuation, if that would be the same, but we'll check and provide details.
And I just have 9 more questions on the CBP. If we can go back. No, I'm joking. It's okay.
No, as a presiding member, I'm not going to allow it. Can I just also ask, is this Bethany Centre open to City of Vincent residents?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so 32% of the residents are City of Vincent residents.
Okay, thank you. That's quite good compared to some of our other clubs. Not that it's a club, but you know what I mean. Okay, so moving on to sale of 202 Vincent Street, North Perth to Main Roads, WA. We had a late offer on the table, which we might want to ask some questions about. Councillor Castle.
I'll ask the question. Through you, Mayor Cole, so what's the process now that we've had this late offer come in, given that the original council decision was to list it for sale?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so we did receive notice that someone was interested last week. I think that's because they've seen the adjacent lot advertised, and obviously our minutes are public. So our view was that this offer from Main Roads provided the best long-term outcome. It remains as a park. And then also Main Roads, if it was sold privately, could require that a portion is compulsory required in the future. So this ensures that it remains as park in the interim to the road widening occurring. So it wasn't our view to progress with this other independent offer, but obviously it's open to them to put it to council, which is what they have done.
Thank you. So, so will this report be updated for next week to reflect that the offers have been received, but the recommendation is to proceed with the Main Roads option?
Through you, Mayor Cole, now that we've actually received a formal offer in writing, we can update that, yes, there has been an offer on the table for 480,000, yes.
Do we know if the neighbours or the potential neighbour that's made this offer is fully aware of those restrictions on the property?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we believe they are because they did ask questions about the council report and that details that, but we also don't know if their offer is conditional, so it may be subject to them getting certain development approval, or there could be other conditions attached. So if we were going to go down the path of considering that offer, that is there's further risks for the city.
If you could clarify from the comments that were made at the beginning of the meeting whether the person or the people who've made this offer already own the adjacent lot, or are they also in the process of purchasing that lot?
They've put an offer in to purchase the adjacent lot, which is 200 Vincent Street, and I believe it's the contract of their offer's been accepted, so they will be purchasing it, but they're not the registered proprietor at this time.
Thank you. And one last question. The offer from Main Roads refers to a price of $475,000 plus GST if applicable. Is that applicable, and is there a net benefit to us, or that comes out in the wash?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a good question. I'll have to check with finance about the GST. Thank you.
Are we able to ask if Main Roads will match the other offer?
Can I just ask a question regarding the process for the set date sale? Did this offer come through during the period that had been defined, and what was that period? I noticed that it went out for advertising, but the set date sale process normally has an end date, and does that define whether we need to or have an obligation to consider offers that come in after that period?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we received the offer from Main Roads prior to the set date sale process commencing. So we've been advertising the other lot at 150 Charles Street through the set date sale process, and that has now closed, and we're going to present the offers to council shortly. In respect to this property, we received the offer from Main Roads and put the set date sale process on hold to negotiate with Main Roads.
Right, so understanding that, how does this sit within our obligations under the Act and the processing that we now do have a second offer that comes through? How do we actually deal with that under the Act?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if you're referring to providing public notice, as Main Roads is a state government department, we're exempt from complying with the public notice requirements under section 3.58.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just there was mention made of administration being supportive of Main Roads' offer, setting aside the financial incentive, but because of the provision of parkland for a period of time. Is that intended to be protected by a caveat? And I'll explain why I ask. Given the interest that's been publicly relayed from the soon-to-be adjacent landowner, what would prevent Main Roads from taking their road widening section and selling the adjacent portion to that landowner for profit in the very near future, and us seeing built form on the section that's not required for road widening?
Through you, Mayor Cole, a condition of the sale to Main Roads, and it's in the council recommendation, is that we enter into a permit. So Main Roads will be providing the city with the right, to maintain the status quo on the land, so it will remain as public open space, landscaped as it currently is, and the city maintains it. So that is a condition of the sale. We weren't proposing a caveat, but that could be something considered. So basically the city would enter into this permit, and that would be secured over the title via a caveat.
I guess so. If the report that comes to council, if we can get some clarity, because regardless of the timing of the offer, I think we have an obligation to consider any offer. And clearly, as minuscule as it is, there is an offer on the table that is financially more advantageous to the community. If we're considering non-financial matters such as the land use in perpetuity, I think it would be good to articulate that and to also offer the best possible protections for that. And my personal preference would be via a caveat that protected that in perpetuity.
Yes, just to follow on from that question, if the report could include some commentary on what protection a permit would provide, as opposed to a caveat, because my reading would be that would only protect the use of that land while it was owned by Main Roads, who we had a permit agreement with. So, yeah, just some consideration about what would provide long-term protection.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'll provide that in the report. And a permit is really agreement about how we use the land. So in terms of protection, we do need a caveat. So that's something we can discuss with Main Roads and add reference to that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, Councillor Hallett asked if we could put the revised offer from a third party to Main Roads. We'll cover that in the amendment to the report. It's only just come in recently. It wasn't our intention to go back to Main Roads, but we'll put this offer to council in the first instance.
Thank you. Just on process, yeah, it's my new t-shirt. Okay, so there was a decision from council approving the sale in April. There was a decision of the COVID relief subcommittee in May approving the sale with the method of sale being set date sale followed by private treaty if no satisfactory offers received, and that the marketing was commencing June 2020 and closing after a minimum of 21 days. My understanding is that the Main Roads contacted the City of Vincent prior to the marketing commencing. And as a result of that contact in June, the marketing didn't commence. And that, but the offer didn't come in until, the formal offer didn't come in until August 17th or something. In terms of the giving effect to the decisions of the council and then this COVID subcommittee, was there any reason that the set date sale couldn't have commenced in accordance with the COVID subcommittee decision in June 2020, even if Main Roads had sort of said that they were interested? Like, is there anything preventing Main Roads from taking part in that set date sale? And in terms of the provisions around set date sales, because I'm not across this, would there have been any obligation on the city to consider the offers differently if they had been received through that process as opposed to what we've just received? And like in a set date sale, do we have an obligation to accept the highest offer regardless of who's made it and the community benefits? Or with the set date sale process, would there have been you know, the ability for this, you know, the council to come to the same point that administration is recommending in relation to use of the space, like as public open space versus private residence?
Through Mayor Cole, I'll ask the manager to comment on that. One of the process issues, Main Roads they were aware of the report and the potential for this to go to market, and they did request some time from the city to consider that, and the Main Roads have their own process to go through for acquisition. But considering it's a public utility, considering that they were going to be using it for public purposes, for improving transport and potentially some major road improvements in the future, we thought we would, we decided to put this offer directly to council before inviting a set date sale process with the intent to sell to a third party where there nearly certainly would have been a house built on that corner, potentially one where Main Roads has been doing work because there's a planning control area over Charles Street, nearly certainly one where that could end up with a dispute in the future, where there might be compulsory acquisition around some of the road that might be required for road widening sometime in the future, but we don't know when that is.
But essentially, there was a decision of the COVID subcommittee to undertake a set date sale commencing in June, and that process did not occur. So that decision at this point in time has not been undertaken. So that hasn't been, so in terms of the obligations on administration is to actually enact the decisions of council, and I presume our subcommittees as well. So that didn't occur in accordance with the legislation that would require that to happen.
Through Mayor Cole, it didn't occur in June, but it can occur as soon as council would like, following consideration of this offer from Main Roads.
And if council wanted to undertake a set date sale, we would make a decision, and that decision might have a date in it and some direction to administration in relation to when we want that process to occur. And so I guess my question on process is, given that there was a decision and it didn't happen, if we were to make a decision again, what's to stop it from not happening again?
Through Mayor Cole, we're looking for best possible offers for this land for going for sale. So if council didn't want to pursue this one, then we could go back.
I'm not talking
to the
about
market.
that. I'm talking about that whether in your assessment it's likely that the best possible offers would not have come through a set date sale process undertaken and commenced in June and going for a minimum of 21 days. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, we hadn't received this advice from Main Roads when we made that recommendation to sell. So this might have been something which Main Roads would have approached us about outside of a sale process.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can just add about the set date sale process. So we'll present all offers. We'll assess them because some will be subject to finance, some will be subject to other conditions. So there's no requirement we recommend to council they accept the highest offer. We'll consider the other conditions related to the offer and then make a recommendation to council based on that, which is what we're doing for 150 Charles Street. And if we went through a set date sale process, we would do the same things, present all the offers with all the considerations.
Cool, that's good to know. And just for final clarification, the marketing activities associated with the set date sale process, if it's here, I don't know, I'm sorry. But is there an estimate of what those marketing activities would cost?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's a percentage, I think, actually, sorry, an additional cost for the sign and the advertisements. It's quite minimal for 150 Charles Street. I think it's around $2,000 for those marketing costs.
Thank you, that's useful. Nothing more from me.
Anything further on this one? No? Okay. Okay, the next item is report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting of the 1st of September 2020 and amendment to Audit Committee terms of reference. Any questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Just for clarity, so recommendation 2.8 is the second word and should either be receives, I assume it's receives the city's corporate, it says receives and there's nothing after it, or receives and endorses. I'm not sure what that word's supposed to be.
Through you, Mayor Cole, thank you for picking that up. Yes, it should be receives the city's corporate risk register.
Anything further? Councillor Gontaszewski.
The actions in the risk register, if we approve those actions, are they all included in the corporate business plan and LTFP? Like the dollar values in the LTFP, or are there additional costs associated with some of those actions that would require an amendment to the LTFP in conjunction with approving them?
Through you, Mayor Cole, might just seek clarification on which action that is in particular. There's a
general statement that I'm going to ask about all approvals
Okay.
in relation to work probably going forward.
Good question. There would be a significance level where a cost or a future cost would be large enough to be significant to impact the long-term financial plan. That would be over and above what we can absorb under the existing budget and managing operational expenditure down in particular areas. We haven't figured out what that number would be in the LTFP, whether it would be $250,000 or $500,000 over the course of that 10 years, but we'll be dedicating quite a lot of time to that annual update process for the LTFP to make sure it's as accurate as possible each year.
Anything further on Audit Committee? Okay. Next item, 8.9, approval of the Chief Executive Officer's appointment to the Australian Urban Design Research Centre Board, otherwise known as AUDRIC. Any questions? No. 8:10, information bulletin. Go for it, Councillor Hallett.
Just in relation to the register of reports to be actioned, the last one, 12.1 from the last council meeting, which was just related to the C40 principles as part of SES and public health plan. In the comments, it just refers to consider the principles as part of the implementation of those plans and then report back to council in March next year. Just wanted to get some clarification around a couple of the items in that amendment which were advocacy related and whether they would be happening up until March, and was that an oversight in not including a closer deadline because some of those are a bit more urgent.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify, including ones that might have been related to state government budget in particular. Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll provide some information and briefing notes about some of those specific items. And also to note, related to C40, an approach by the City's Power Partnership for the City of Vincent to endorse a set of principles they put together for a sustainable green recovery.
Anything further on the information bulletin? No, okay. This is I'm not quite sure when this got uploaded. Was it just this afternoon? The 8.11? Yeah, new lease to Kids Galore Proprietary Limited, 15 Haynes Street, North Perth. So I did speak with the CEO about bringing this forward as a late item, and we were quite keen to get this sorted out for the families of Kids Galore and give them some certainty. So whilst we're, you know, late item, it's one of those ones it's good to deal with as soon as possible. So I'm not sure if people have had a chance to read this. Has anyone had a chance to read it or no? CEO, do you want to give a bit of a quick outline?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, just to confirm in terms of the timing, we only received advice from Kids Galore yesterday that they were happy with the proposed terms and conditions, and what's proposed in the lease reflects the market valuation which has been accepted. But importantly and uniquely for this site and for this tenant, it replicates the council decision-making process and the Attorney General's approval for use of that site, which is subject to that caveat on the title. So we've incorporated those conditions into the proposed lease terms.
Is there an increase? I know there was talk of that. It's 35,000. What are they currently paying per annum?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so they currently pay 30,000, so it's a slight increase in the rent.
Were they happy to accept that increase?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so the Director of Kids Galore has confirmed that all terms are acceptable.
Okay, and was that to do with market, like a sort of evaluation that took place?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so we did receive a market valuation and that's attached. I think it's a confidential attachment. The market rental valuation is interesting because they because Kids Galore have to transition off the site, the value of the rental valuation declines over the term. So that's what the valuer said, but it's best to take an average of the whole period. So another option would be to start out with a much higher rent in the first year and then reduce that over the 5 years. But we've gone with an average, which is more consistent and I think easier for the city and Kids Galore.
Thank you. Any further questions on this one, or feel free to ask questions during the week,
one
Councillor
from me.
Vatakis?
Yeah, just one for me. Just so has the tenant received any subsidies or rebates, or are they eligible to get any assistance under COVID relief separate to this agreement?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that was actually awarded by the committee today. So I think they've experienced a downturn of about 25%. I can provide more details or we can check in the minutes of the COVID committee, but that was over the previous quarter. So the city has provided assistance based in line with the national code.
I can look it up for you, Councillor Vatakis, if you like, and let you know.
That was probably that exciting 18 minutes that I missed.
Oh, yeah. That's right. We did have you tune in. Thank you for that. I think you're our only audience member today.
I just would add to that that
Yep.
the minutes of the COVID meeting would also have details about what other relief they might have received in their financials that they provided.
Thank you, Councillor Castle.
Okay, so we've dealt with 8:11. So
Excuse me, Mayor. Councillor
Oh.
Wallace.
Councillor Wallace, come on down.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. It was just about the rental assessment that we got done. Like the agent, like the average that was calculated was done on the basis of there being nil rent per annum for years 4 and 5, and like a quite high rent for the first year. I was just
Can I just ask? This is a confidential attachment. Is this question? Do we need to go take this question in confidential session? Just checking, Councillor Wallace. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we're just generally talking about the valuation and the amount of rent. I think that's okay. And I think I could probably address Councillor Loden's, Councillor Wallace's question. Just
right, okay.
on
No,
how-
go ahead, Councillor Wallace. Continue your question. Sorry.
I think I'd covered it, but yeah, really just years 4 and 5, there was nil rent per year, and then we were calculating the average over 5 years. Whether admin had any comments on the validity of a nil rent being applied per year. Like we're just passing a property management framework that includes minimum rents for all kinds of organisations, and this being a for-profit organisation, entering into a lease that included a free years 4 and 5, and it doesn't seem to align with that to begin with.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. So we did discuss that with the valuer. So because of the specific circumstances with this property, so it's subject to the caveat, and the city's received approval from the Attorney General to have it continue to be used for childcare purposes, provided that they transition off the site over the 5 years. The valuer believed that the value in those last 2 years, because they're going to have reduced enrolments and parents wouldn't want to send their kids to a childcare centre that's about to close, and they should be, I guess, reducing their numbers, and the services would basically be nil for those years. So that's why they've recommended to us that we use an average for each year over the 5 years period. But they did say that basically the value, the market rental valuation in those 2 final years when the childcare centre had to close down in the very short term would be around nil.
Anything further, Councillor Wallace? No. Okay. Any other questions on the Kids Galore lease? Okay.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might
CEO
just
wants to
comment.
ask a question.
No, just to clarify a previous answer on the lease contains provisions for the transition plan, and for the transition plan to be submitted by the tenant to the city in accordance with those approved timeframes. I can confirm that the Kids Galore is actively seeking alternative sites, and that process has already begun, and we've had some discussions with Kids Galore about those potential alternate sites.
Sorry, could I add another question?
Yep,
I mean, the calculation of nil rent for years, or the estimation of nil rent for years 4 and 5, I guess were done on the presumption that their business is going to be closing. If Kids Galore are opening an alternative location relatively nearby, also within the city of Vincent, like I guess kids could go to the current location and then transition to the new one when that's open. So, does admin think that will, I guess, reduce the likelihood that enrolment numbers will taper off over the course of this lease, and therefore kind of invalidate the reduction over time in rental value?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so we would have assumed that our valuer we engaged to provide this market valuation took these into account. I guess they assume that it's quite low likelihood that they're going to get a premises in close proximity. So we did discuss it with them, and the recommendation we're putting to council is that the rent is $35,000 a year, increased by 5%. So while that is based on the rent reducing in future years, we have come to that average figure, which I think is more appropriate than going with the valuer's initial high rent and reducing it over the 5 years to nil.
Yes, go ahead.
I guess, can I just ask a question to follow on from that? Maybe this can be clarified in the report. Is the reduction of that market value to nil in those final years also a reflection of the fact that we can't lease that property to anyone else, that it has no market value to any other tenant other than Kids Galore if they still remain there? So that might just be something that can be clarified in terms of arriving at that average amount, if that's correct.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can get some more information on the valuation and how they came to that conclusion, and we can include it in the council report.
Any more questions on Kids Galore? Okay. All right. So I just wanted to ask a governance question, because we don't normally use this section of the agenda, but we've got 2 items under representation on committees and public bodies. And is this just for noting? Does council need a resolution to note or to take any particular action in relation to this? I think it's just a matter with the COVID subcommittee of calling for someone to see who might be able to come to that meeting on the 6th of October. I don't think we need a resolution, but I'm not sure whether we need to note or do anything further in relation to Perth Music Committee and Council for Targus.
Through Mayor Cole, the terms of reference for the COVID committee don't require a council resolution for any of the other councillors who are listed to be deputies or attend, but we thought we'd put it to the meeting next week just to confirm publicly who would be representing.
Okay, so this is sort of for information when it's under this section. Okay, so for information.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe for Councillor Fotakis's invitation to join the Perth Music Committee, we will need Council to make a decision on that. So we would note, I think as we did for Councillor Hallett, who was appointed to a committee previously, Council will need to make a decision on that at the council meeting.
Okay, well, I think we'll need a very brief report then with a recommendation, because the way it's written, it's just listed on the agenda.
Through you, Mayor Cole. I think in the past we've just moved and seconded that when we got to the item, but we can do a brief report and attach Councillor Fotakis's supporting information.
Yours was a report, wasn't it? Yeah, I think Councillor Hallett's was a report. Happy to do that, even if it just says, you know, are we noting, are we endorsing? What's the recommendation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, for Councillor Fotakis's invitation to the committee, Council would be approving her as the city's representative on that committee.
Okay. All right. Well, we might just need a bit of paperwork then. Yeah. Thank you for that.
And as per my email this afternoon, just ensure that those terms of reference and the background documents are provided as well.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. So that will be dealt with next week. So we now have, we've got 3 confidential items listed, but item 11.1 has been withdrawn by administration. So we will now have to move behind closed doors to discuss 2 of the 3 confidential items. And